What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another Pokemon Wonder. Today, we're going to dive in with Matt from Pokemon Classics. There's been some people in the hobby, and the majority would call pillars, and because they uphold the greater good, they contribute to the longevity, and they truly inspire. And Matt at Pokemon Classics is one of those people. Today, we're honored to have him here with us, and we're going to go through and look at this with a keen eye and look through the past, present, and future states of the hobby. With more reputable collection in the hobby and decades of experience sourcing, grading, Pokemon Classics will enlighten us with a wealth of knowledge, all while having a blast while doing it. Let's join us here in this historical moment and talk some Pokemon. Matt, welcome to Pokemon Wonder. I want to jump in and just tell us a little bit about who you are and how do you represent yourself in the Pokemon hobby, Matt?
Well, I'm Pokemon Classics. My actual name is Matt, and I'm really more of a collector. I also like to do a lot of the YouTube stuff. Anybody that's watched my channel before, it's very much vintage oriented since that's what I grew up with. My backstory is I originally started collecting in 1999 when Pokemon first came out. It wasn't something I was initially super passionate about. All of my friends were into it, so they kind of dragged me into it kicking and screaming. But then once I was in, I went fully immersed. I was playing the game semi competitively, not like
Okay,
super big stage, but I went to some of the, local mall
regionals.
tours and, like, the
Okay,
qualifiers to the Super Trainer Showdown. I was a collector, ended up inheriting a league to run for a few years, from one of our local card stores. So that was one of my big introductions in,
nice.
and I was a set collector, primarily the early Wizards of the Coast sets, and so that's where I continued after our mall shut down and after Pokemon kind of died. I was still collecting as much as I could, trying to build
Okay,
out those
you
sets that I'd
maintained it
started in my childhood. So that's kind of my backstory in the hobby. And now it's still doing what I love, but hopefully trying to infuse some educational value in the content that
for
I
sure,
produce.
for sure. And so you never actually stopped collecting this entire time. You kept going all the way from childhood until now. There was no pause for you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say that there was a pause in there just by necessity. When
Okay,
a lot of stores stopped selling cards, there wasn't a lot of options for buying or trading with people anymore. So there were some dead periods. But then once I rediscovered eBay, then my
that
collecting
was
was
it.
able to substantially increase once more, probably about 2010 when I started like actually using the internet to fulfill some of those things that just couldn't be done locally. So I don't know. There I guess there is some breaks in there technically, but not really by choice.
Okay, all right. And I'm just curious. When did you actually do the league? You were running the league yourself. What year was that?
Yeah, so it was in 2000 that, a league
Okay.
was formed in my neighborhood, and I originally wasn't the one to put it together. They were the employees of the mall, of the actual store,
Oh,
and one of
geez.
them
Okay.
moved away, so then they offered me the role as, like, the assistant gym leader, and then eventually the other one moved away, and so they just put me in charge of it all, and at the time, I was, like, 13 or 14, so they taught me how to write out all the paperwork and actually mail it into Wizards of the Coast, putting in our attendance, the amount of, like, badges that were issued, the promo cards that were distributed, all that sort of
That's
stuff.
cool.
So,
That's
it was a
cool
lot of responsibility early on,
for
but
a
I think that
14-year-old.
was yeah, but I think that's
Yeah.
part of why I became so engaged with it is because it did give me that, like, extra sense of responsibility and growing up.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know, it was a lot of trust to be entrusted with at a young age.
Yeah. Especially at 14, trying to do all of that. I mean, that's a lot. I'm not sure how big they were, but even 10 players, that's a lot to manage and manage all the paperwork because I'm sure none of it was online at the time.
Yeah, we typically had about 50 to 70 people each weekend.
Okay. Wow. 50 to 70. Okay, that's a
Mhm.
big event. Okay. Yeah. So
Yeah, it
you
was
definitely had your hands out there.
yeah, it was a lot of fun, though.
We were talking just a little bit before we started the stream, and you mentioned that you were actually teaching grammar. Did you say? I'm sorry. Is that right?
Yeah, so I teach high school English classes, and it's primarily sophomore English, but I do teach a couple video production classes and occasionally a grammar prep class that's for like college entry. It's a lot of
Okay.
ACT prep. So that's one of the side classes that I really enjoy to teach. And for most people, it sounds like a death sentence, but it's really not that bad.
And you said you were doing high school.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So
You know,
big
whenever
congrats
kids
there.
whenever kids don't want to take grammar class or don't want to do grammar, I can just lightly tap them on the back and say, "There, there, there."
I understand. And we do appreciate it, Matt, because all those that are bringing up the future generations and educating them to be a part of society is no small task. So hats off to you and all the teachers. So much appreciated. What's your degree in, if you wouldn't mind sharing? Where did your background kind of get you into teaching? How did that transition for you? Because it sounds either like that was something that was in your family, you kind of had it on your vision since the beginning. How did that play out for you?
Yeah, so from about 7th grade, I knew I wanted to be a teacher, and a lot of my family and friends were surprised to see that I wasn't a math teacher because math was always the subject that was just intuitively easy for me. I was really good at it in school. Scored really high on a lot of the math league stuff that was done and on the ACT, but I just couldn't envision teaching it where it's always the same.
Mm,
And it would frustrate me when you'd see that one kid in class be like, I don't get it. When it's really simple for me in that situation, I just don't think I could break down simple concepts any easier. So about 7th grade, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. About
okay.
ninth grade, I refined that desire to specifically English. I felt like there was enough diversity of content, the ability to mix it up with different books, different literature, creative
That
writing
makes sense.
assignments that it would hopefully never get too stale. And that has been the case so far. It's been 13 years. Uh, but I've always valued education. I think I've said this in a couple of podcasts, but neither of my parents finished high school. They did eventually get
Mm,
their GEDs, and so they missed out on some opportunities despite being very, very intelligent and hardworking individuals. Where I saw some of those opportunities that they missed out on. So that's one of the reasons why I doubled down on education and took up the role as an educator, hopefully
makes
providing
sense.
that to future generations.
It makes a lot of sense. You know, we tend to look at those moments growing up and see where there's a lack and try to fulfill that in some way, shape, or form in our adulthood. So I can definitely see the path. Yeah, I was curious though, because if you were so good at math, do you think they had any contribution because you were doing all the damage attacks and the counting up of the, the Pokemon damage as you were playing TCG? Was that the reason?
Yeah, I don't know if Pokemon, like, contributed to the, mathematical analytical side of the
Yeah,
brain. I think if anything, it was the opposite, where because that side of my brain was part that I was using so frequently, that just playing the game
yeah,
became
it
so
was
much
easy.
more attractive
Yeah.
because there is a lot of strategy involved. To
Hmm.
anybody that actually plays the game, I know most of the people I interact with are like, "I've never played the cards, I just collect them. I just look at them. I don't even know the rules." It is a fun game.
It's truly fun. I was just playing today. My wife got a new deck. We got her a Calyrex deck, and we were playing, and she wanted to test it against the Mew deck. So she said, "Okay, let's do one more round." So we played, and then my son wanted to play TCG live. He built a new deck with Paldea. So all right, we'll give it a try. But it's a blast. For those who haven't tried it, I think Danny actually said it recently in one of his videos. You know, if you play just a little bit, it'll change the way you look at the hobby and the cards and the Pokemon characters. It really changes perspective.
Yeah, there's a whole new appreciation that comes in, especially as
Hmm.
you're looking at some of the cards from a collectability standpoint, where there
Hmm.
are certain cards that part of their rarity and their notoriety, at least historically, is because of how competitive they were in whatever part of the meta they were in. They were in the early meta or the mid tier or even, the more contemporary.
Unfortunately, I missed the early years, but I'm definitely liking it now. But I can say when I played the regionals last year, I played with the Lugia deck, and that Lugia deck and Lugia himself or herself, it just really stuck with me. So that whole idea of having my first deck and it being a Lugia deck, I can definitely resonate with how that would be impactful. You know, growing up. We have some love for you here. You know, from Chef. Matt's underrated. Love the stuff. Love the stuff. Thanks for joining us, Chef.
Yeah, thank you. Very kind.
You know, echo that from Seasoned Salt. Good to see you, Seasoned Salt. Thanks for joining us, buddy. iFOMO's with us. Good to see iFOMO. Let's see. Yeah. Chef was reformed to the cheese stick here in Roy Moon. It's pretty intense. Yeah, I haven't played against the cheese stick yet, but I do know that one of the characters from the Roaring Moon set that just came out, it actually is quite powerful. It actually can kill you in a single attack. It does 200 damage to itself, but that's what my son's been using trying to beat me down with the Charizard deck. So we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah,
Um, s-
I haven't kept up with the
I was gonna ask. Yeah,
competitive
did you
nature of
play?
cards in modern. Like I stopped collecting around probably about, like, when Expedition came out, so just as the E series cards were developing, and so a
Okay.
lot of them I'm, like, familiar with beyond that, but a lot of the game mechanics have changed, and even to me now,
Yeah.
seeing, like, HPs above 150 or
So
attacks
just too
above
much.
100 just feels completely blasphemous to me.
Fair enough. Fair enough. When you only had 90 HP, it makes sense, right? And that was the evolution. That was
The
the
power
evolution.
creep, yeah, it's real.
Um, Chef does agree with us, though. He says that as he's opening cards now, he stops to read them. So you 100% look at these differently as you start to play, for sure. Well, it sounds like you answered part of it. So you don't really play much anymore. But I have seen you open some modern packs in some of your videos. For example, when you were trying to give yourself some rollerblading challenges, which we'll talk about later. I think it was celebrations, if I'm not mistaken. So do you still dabble into some of the modern, just very specific sets? You just collect a few but don't play. How do you interact at that level?
Yeah, so the sets that bring me back are the ones that have the, like, vintage connection. So
Okay.
Celebrations was, like, slam dunk for me because you do have those reprint artworks from early on. Evolutions, I opened some of those when those came out, and that was a nostalgia trip
Yeah.
if I ever had one. And then,
You to do a
most
double
recently,
take.
151, like,
Yeah.
151 doesn't necessarily have the reprint artworks going on, but, it at least is a generation of Pokemon that I'm totally familiar with, and it's all recontextualized with new artworks and new attacks, so I think that's, to me, like, somebody like me that's more of a vintage collector, the best of both worlds, slowly drawing us back to the modern, product.
Do you like the new way they do the artwork and the designs? Are you attracted to that at all, or do you still prefer the historical look and feel?
For me, it's always gonna be the historical looking feel. I certainly appreciate it, and I'm not gonna be one of the people that, like, talk down on modern or say that it's terrible because it's great, and some of the artwork is amazing, like, they are putting so much effort into
Yeah.
some of those artwork illustrations. To me, though, it's just so busy, so chaotic that my boomer brain really can't handle it. It's a personal
Yeah.
failing.
No, no, no worries, no worries. Yeah, I can guarantee that I feel the same way on some artworks, like Giratina from Lost Origin. Like some of those are just too busy for me. But for example, when you think of 151, I love the Blastoise line. It's just beautiful in the water. I just absolutely love that one. So yeah, I
That
can
is the
appreciate
best
that.
of the starters, I think.
Yeah.
And what I really like about those is I think the simplicity of it, but yet the concept of having each
Hmm.
of the evolutionary lines, like, tell a story is something that's really cool, and it
Yeah.
just adds another dimension to the collectability.
Fully agree. Fully agree. So, did you actually do a set collection on 151 in celebration? Are you going full, set collector on that set, or just open a couple?
Yep, I've started a set for both of them, and, the way
Okay.
I do it is I bought a bunch of packs of both, but it needs to be some sort of climactic situation or some sort of experiential milestone where I treat myself to some packs. And the goal is to put it off as long as possible and to draw it out over the course of several years of slowly working
Mm,
those master sets together. Um, I realize that's probably a lofty goal, especially with probably more so with 151 than celebrations. But I like the idea of having to actually earn the cards rather than just buying the singles or just ripping a whole bunch of product all at once and just filling it in. I wanna have
right.
specific memories associated with the different pulls.
You know, if I think through that, especially if we're talking about this over a couple of years, you're always gonna be playing catch up for sure. Because every series they're gonna have out now another recollection back to the historical set, maybe one, maybe two. And so you're always gonna have one or two sets that you're always gonna be trying to open up for the previous 2 years. So I think it's gonna be interesting because you're gonna always be chasing a little something. They're always gonna have something there for you to work towards. So
Yeah, but that's
interesting.
gonna give me some variety in packs too,
Exactly.
because instead of having a video where I'm just opening celebrations packs, maybe there'll be like 5 or 6 different sets, and I'm like, "Let's do 2 of these, now let's do 2
Fair
of these
point. Fair
ones."
point. Fair point. All right. All right. I like it, but I like the whole reward idea behind it, and that's nice. It's a nice touch, and that's actually something I appreciated quite a lot. I was watching one of your videos, and I think you and I don't know if you still have them. We'll talk about it here in a little bit. But you had a Neo Rev First Edition box, I believe it was, or um,
I
was
have
it
a gym challenge,
Gym
PlayStation
Challenge?
Gym Challenge.
And I think you had a fossil as well.
Jungle.
Jungle. Okay.
Yep.
And you talked about holding those, and you said basically that you're okay. Like it doesn't bother you to hold these and not open them because somebody had asked you, how could you hold these and not like rip them open? It's like, no,
Yeah, I
that's
have a
actually
lot of
very easy for
restraint
me.
when it comes to packs. In fact, having like a couple hundred, I don't know if it's that many. It might be. I think I have 100 celebrations packs or so that are still just sitting
Just
there
sealed.
unopened. And knowing that I have a set that's not complete yet, it is a little bit tempting just to rifle through them and start opening them. But it's maybe the gift and the curse of being as busy as I am with school and with all the grading and the paperwork that comes along with that is there are plenty of distractions to keep my mind off the temptation.
Add in a couple of really good videos, the editing quality you put into it, and you have zero time to open packs.
Yeah, so there you go. Like it's a self-reinforced restraint mechanism.
I like it. I love it. Another compliment here from Bridge Burner, absolute goat, and then some love from TL. Love your channel, incredibly unique, irreplaceable content. Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree
Thank you
more.
guys. Thank you.
We'll dive into the collecting side because we skipped a little bit here. We kind of dove into it a little bit already. But I'm curious. You've actually been collecting, I think you said, really since the childhood, really heavily again since 2010. How are your collection goals going? Because I know you want to do pretty much everything in WotC. We know you're focused on the classics, right? But how is that coming along? Are you near completion at this point in terms of those overall sets?
Yeah, I've been near completion for a while, and I like to describe it as a collecting stalemate of sorts, where a lot of the cards that I need are just so scarce in
Mm,
population or so
okay,
expensive that I'm not I
can't
can't either
justify
can't
it.
afford it or I can't justify spending that kind of money on a single card just to upgrade a number on it. I am a PSA 10 collector, primarily
Right,
first edition holo sets of all the vintage Wizards of the Coast sets. I have a lot of them completed. Fossils done, Gym Challenges done, most of Gym Heroes, most of Neo Discovery, most of Neo Genesis, etc.
nice,
Um,
nice.
but
Congrats.
there are still some of the ones out there that I need that are the really heavy hitters. So the goal is always to grade them myself by buying collections and then striking gold. And that used to be a lot easier to do back in like 2012 to 2014 when mint sets were out there to buy. And even then, the probability of grading some of those cards was pretty low, but the entry point was easier. So you could justify throwing more and more money at it, where now it's not realistic
You
on a
can't.
number of fronts. But I have branched out to a couple of easier things. One of the things I'm collecting right now is I don't know if you're familiar with the W stamped promos
Yes,
early
yeah,
on. They all came in top deck magazines. And so I have like all of the W stamp promo cards individually. And I had some of the magazines, but
nice.
then I was like, it'd be nice to find the magazines still sealed with those promo cards in them and make like a wall display of all of them in
Oh, that'd be
chronological
really
order,
nice.
get them framed. So, I've been working on those. They're kinda hard to find. They're not overly expensive because the individual cards aren't that bad, the W stamped ones. But it's something different, something I've been after. That's
I
just
like
one
that.
example.
And I love just another compliment here, Matt. I love how you turn a lot of your graded cards, I would say memorabilia, into art, and how you use that to inspire your working space. So, kudos, man. It's a very inspiring the way you do that.
Well, it gives you something to, like, work towards, and it is meant to be appreciated. I think that's why any collector collects something, and, although I can't display everything, and there are some things that I don't like to keep in my home or in my office, something like that where it's like, "Oh, this magazine is, $100. Yeah, I'll
Right.
frame that up and put that on the wall. That's cool."
Yeah, for sure. I think it's been hard to find the creative way to display your content or your products, and you've been able to find little niches and little areas, and you combine that with a couple of different concepts, and I love how you share it with all of us. So I'm definitely taking a few notes myself.
I'll throw this out there too to anybody that's watching, but that's one of the benefits of either starting a YouTube channel or having
Mm,
social media accounts like Instagram is you can showcase your collection, document it for your own purposes, but then you can come up with some really interesting ways to photograph it or take videos with it. And that's ultimately like what collecting is building those memories of the collection,
mm.
documenting the experience. So there's a lot of ways you can make it more interesting, more experiential, and hopefully that more meaningful.
And you'd be surprised how many people will connect, with the things that you're creating and doing. It's at first you may think, well, nobody's gonna like it. It's just, for me, it's just my own style, but you'd be surprised. I was curious, when you think about your collections, is there anything, any kind of really nice gems that you are actually looking to pay for, that you're willing to buy, that you're chasing? Any really nice cards in the collection you're chasing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that I'm still chasing. A lot of them aren't in the price point where I would actually pull the
Okay.
trigger on it just yet, but I still need a trainer deck B. I have the trainer deck A, and that's part of why I want it so bad. Is like the one is just sitting there without its partner, and it just feels empty and alone. So I got to get
Sealed,
the
of
other
course,
one.
right?
Yeah, well, the trainer deck A that I have was slightly used when I bought it, and it doesn't have the actual case for it, which I would love. But I do have all the cards for it, and so I need the other one just to kind of complete that part of the goal. Then from there, we would work on perhaps finding sealed versions and upgrading from there. But at least getting one in the collection would be the first step.
Okay.
Um, One of the other interesting things, and Swami, I don't know if he's
Mhm.
watching or if you're familiar with him, but he's been
I
trying
am.
to help me with this. There's all these different Pokemon League issued shirts that came out during the Mall Tour and the Super Trainer Showdowns back in like 1999 through 2002. And I've been collecting all of those shirts, and that's one of the other things that I'm
Nice.
working on displays for is getting them like hung up almost like jerseys, how people frame jerseys.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's one
Cool.
that I can't find for the life of me that I've seen pictures of on the internet before, and I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to look up what the origin of it was, but it has the Neo Genesis characters on it, and it says like Pokemon
Hmm.
Mall Tour or something on it. And I have the one with the Neo Revelation, the one with the Neo Discovery, and there is
Hmm.
like a Pokemon League gym leader shirt that's in red that has it, and I have that one. But this other one
Nice.
is black. It's weird. I'm beginning to think it's mythical. I'm not entirely sure, but I need that shirt.
So if anybody hears this podcast and you know somebody who has it, reach out to Matt. He needs it for his collection.
Yeah, find me that shirt. I think there's a for alligator on it, maybe.
I think I know somebody with some trainer decks, so I'll maybe make a poke for you and see if there's anything there that you'd be interested in. Was that the one that you? And then forgive me if I'm mixing up topics because I watch so much of your content and sometimes I mix them up. Was that the one you did the motorcycle trip on?
That was, one of the world championship decks,
Okay,
and I
okay,
found that for auction. It was a 2016 deck, and
okay.
the interesting thing with that was it was a used deck that it had really
Mm,
blurry
right.
pictures, but then there was also a Blastoise EX, like the actual holographic one in there.
Exactly.
And I was like, "That doesn't belong in there, it does it?" And I was like, "I think that's hollow." So I took a flyer on it. It was only like $100 and made an adventure out of it. So it's just kind of a fun way to spend a summer afternoon.
And that was a really cool video too. I like how you did that, just that kind of cross country, and then you were fighting a storm, and it was a nice little mix of things.
It was a weird day, but a really good day.
Especially when you find out you get the extra one. I have Fama here saying he loves your psychology approach on your videos. Again, much love, much love.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I do this video series called Market Psychology, and I like to take different psychology principles or ideas or experiments and try to work them into a way where it's relevant for collectors. I'm actually working on another one of those right now.
Nice, nice. We won't spill the beans just yet. We'll wait for it to come out. What is the thing that you're going to look for after your WotC collection's finished? Because at some point, I know there's some cards in there that you may have to wait some time to get, but one time that's going to be finished, what do you think you're going to head to after that?
Well, right now it's base set through Neo Destiny, and
Okay,
although I never really interacted with or collected the e-reader sets like the EX series, I guess, I
okay.
find those cards to be very attractive. So that's probably where I'd migrate next, and I guess it makes the most logical sense chronologically. But I don't know. There's probably some other like random smaller subsets that would be easier to start with that might take me down a rabbit trail where I can feel like I'm getting some momentum and getting some easy wins. In psychology, those are often described as winning streaks, and the more of those you can produce, especially for kids in the classroom, the more apt they
Hmm.
are to continue trying. So, small victories.
Dopamine hits, right? So I mean, you tie that to success and reward, and achievement, and then they want to have more of that, right? So
Yeah, but hopefully it's the intrinsically motivated kind where you have that sense of achievement and
right,
self-actualization rather than that external like, "Hey, I looked at TikTok and that spiked the
right.
dopamine for me."
True, true. Because those are the ones that give you true, I would say, persistence over time. Everything else tends to be short-lived when you sit back and you're externally motivated. You take that example when you go to the gym, right? If somebody's there and you're with the trainer, and the only reason you're going is because you have the trainer, and then that trial period finishes or you finish the course, did you have it in here in order to keep going? And that's I think what we're referring to here. Yeah. Did You mentioned earlier the sourcing? So, are you changing your sourcing approach because it's obviously, as you already said, got quite complicated? How are you going about now trying to close the gaps in your collection? Where do you source these days?
Yeah, it's really tough. I'm still primarily looking on eBay. Part of having a YouTube channel is it's been beneficial and some people have reached out to me and been like, "Hey, are you buying collections?" I'm like, "Well, maybe. What do you have?" And usually they show me their binder of all modern cards that have been chewed on by their pet
Yeah,
dog, and I'm like, "Well, that's not really what I'm looking for," but, um
thanks. Yeah,
I don't really have a good answer to that. Like, my sourcing has been extremely slow. I'm fortunate that I
okay,
have a pretty big stockpile of cards that I had amassed that I didn't really know what to do with since initially my goals were to grade the cards that I needed and ones that either I already had or that were extras or ones that weren't like a Gem Mint 10 candidate or like, I'll deal with these later. I'll just, throw them in a box and put them in storage. And so it's been a rediscovery of going back through all those cards in storage and figuring out what's there. And that's been a nice little backlog project for me to work on, but I don't know. I do certainly need to get back into sourcing and see what I can find, especially for the raw mint stuff, which probably
super
non-existent at
hard.
this point.
Yeah, you have to wait a couple more years for it to maybe slow down a little bit.
I need to find
Um,
one of those like storage units that everybody's talking about that just has a bunch of like sealed booster boxes in it and just crack them all open and
you break all your rules there, Matt. Break all your
yeah,
rules. Yeah.
all of the rules out the window.
Spend the money, crack a bunch of packs, fill a setup all at once. I mean, that's just gonna send you down a whirlwind of dopamine.
Yeah, cracking all the boxes to find the cards to send into grading also probably isn't the most
Yeah,
advantageous advice.
yeah, it definitely won't help your wallet. I'll tell you that for sure. Uh, well, I hope you do find them. You definitely will. Again, I know some people, and even myself, if I have some things that help you complete your collection, happy to do it. And I see what you're doing here, Matt. So what you're doing is you're timing yourself so that as you move through each generation of Pokemon, you'll eventually be at what we call today modern, but for you at that point, it'll be vintage. So you're just giving enough time for everything to turn into vintage. I think that's what you're doing, right? We figured
So
it
what you're
out.
saying is, like, I'm strategically buying at the worst possible time instead of buying it when it comes out, getting stuff at MSRP, wait until it spikes or although
Uh,
maybe it'll work the opposite way. Maybe people won't
maybe
want it anymore.
exactly, yeah,
They'll move
and
on to the
then you can
next
get
thing.
everything.
Yeah.
But you're slowly moving your way through it. So then you can always say, "I'm still collecting the vintage," because it's 20 years later, and Sword and Shield is now vintage, right? So I got it, I got it.
Maybe that's the strategy is to go to all the trade shows with just a binder full of all the most recent cards to drop and just trade with kids and be like, "Let me take that older modern off your
Right.
hands for this brand new modern."
Yeah, nothing like trading the kids for a first edition Charizard for this Paldea Evolved, right? Roy Moon.
I'll tell you what, I was, losing the trade up challenge really badly at the local convention that I went to last month. Any
Oh,
kid that came
uh
up to me and asked me if I wanted to trade for their modern cards for other modern cards that I didn't have, I just gave him a modern booster pack. I'm like, "Here, you can just have this."
this is it.
Yep.
I'm not gonna go through it.
I, bought a couple boxes last time I was at Collecticon and was giving packs away and still had a bunch left, and they were out on my table, so I'm like, "Here, have a pack. You, have a pack."
You don't have to buy anything; it's free. Are
Yeah.
you serious? Yeah, no, it's no problem. Yeah, it's actually a great way to start conversations too. I know that a lot of the guys they were in the Power L here at the Charlotte Collecticon. Really great with the kids. I sit there and watch, and they were just connecting with everybody and having great conversation. bringing a bunch of smiles to the kids' faces. It was a blast.
Yeah,
Yep,
we need more of that. That's really what the hobby's
exactly,
about.
exactly. Perhaps FOMO, perhaps. Yeah, too much psychology for me. I'll have to up my game for sure. Have to up my game. All right. Well, we'll jump over maybe a little bit to hear your perspective on while we're in the collecting space. Maybe now investing. Um, I saw some videos you had out. It's been a couple of years. The ones I was looking at, you had some 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and obviously there was a different time. But I'm curious to where you sit today on just your viewpoint on investing in Pokemon. Do you see that as still something viable? And if so, how do you see it in terms of timing?
Yeah, I think what Pokemon has taught us is a lot of different lessons. One, though, is I do think Pokemon is going to prove itself to be a timeless collectible, much
Yeah,
like sports cards going before it, or
right.
some of those more vintage and antique style collectibles. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of downward pressure in the market, and I think a
Yeah,
lot of that was foreseeable. Some of the videos that I made initially were a bit overly optimistic, though I did suggest like we were still in that bull run, and that was my anticipation was that we still would be in the short term, but long term, anything that goes up like that has to
has
come
to come
back
down.
down.
Yeah,
And I think we're in a place now where it's a lot healthier of a market for people that are getting in, and there's a lot less downward risk at this point. I still feel like the downward pressure is still there, and I think that
yeah,
we'll still see prices struggle, especially given the larger macroeconomic situation that we're in. A lot of credit card debt, a lot of high interest rates, stuff like that is, I don't think, doing us any favors in Pokemon. But 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, I do think the items that are legitimately rare and have scarcity to them will be the ones that perform really well. I'm not as sold on some of the more mass produced items, though, again, a lot of it is just price point. Where are you buying in and what do you anticipate selling at? So I
right,
think a lot of times the conversation, when it unnecessarily turns into an argument of like, which item is better? This is the one that works. This is the one that doesn't. Anything works. It's just a matter of
time,
supply and demand
time
and
and
where you
price.
happen to enter and where you happen to exit.
Right.
Um, but yeah, it doesn't seem like a very profitable market at the moment, and I don't think it will be for at least a little while yet. But generally speaking, I think that's a good time to consider a market is when everybody else is
Right.
fleeing, right? That's like the
Yep.
age old advice is buy when there's blood in the water, when
Right.
everybody else is selling. So we'll see. I do think there has been a flood of product, both from vintage and slabs being graded, just flooding the market. Also with Pokemon producing an astronomical amount of new cards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so we'll have to see if all that gets eaten up by the market and how long the saturation sticks around, if it ever gets fully broken through again or absorbed. But I don't know. I'm still bullish in the long term and a little bit more bearish in the short term.
That's probably the right approach to have. I mean, with any real long-term investment, otherwise you're more talking about flipping. Otherwise, do you have pieces like the booster boxes we spoke about earlier that you're holding for that purpose, or for you is everything really that you hold personal collection, and you don't really think of things that you have long term as an investment, so to speak? How do you see it?
Yeah, so there's a lot of items that I have extras of that in retrospect probably should have sold at the peak, but I did have some emotional, sentimental attachment to them and felt like they would be good in the long term. So some examples of that, I have some extra first edition base set hollows, including an extra PSA
Hmm.
9 Charizard, which retrospect much more down now than it is at the time, but I don't necessarily feel bad
Yeah.
about it because it's a card I enjoy having and it's one of the most iconic cards in the hobby. So not something that I'm gonna beat myself up on. There's other cards like that that I have multiple of, some different sealed products like you mentioned with the, first edition booster boxes from Wizards of the Coast that I have. Those aren't necessarily collection pieces, they were just opportunities that I had to
Okay.
buy back in, like, 2013 at a really attractive price, and I was like, "Yeah, I'll stash these away, these will probably increase in price someday." And, I think I got them for, like, $400 each at the time. So,
Amazing.
tempting to sell
Amazing.
those, but there wasn't really a necessity to, and if I'll be honest, I wasn't even sure, like, the best way to go about selling a booster box without getting scammed at the time, so that was also, like, a barrier to selling as well, where I'm like, "I'll just deal with this
Yeah.
later."
Yeah.
Part
Put
of
it
it
back
too
in
is just
storage.
the busyness of being a teacher during the pandemic was also unbelievably
Mm.
crazy, and so there wasn't the extra time to even consider, like, the best way to liquidate some of those items, and
Uh,
I was fine just hanging on to them.
I didn't think about your time as a teacher during the pandemic because, yeah, that was complete craziness for the school systems. Um, wow. What was it like for you? Did you go completely remote? If we change topics for just a minute to the teacher topic,
Yeah, so that
did you
first,
stay?
like, year was late March when school first shut down, and so that first little bit in 2020 was it 20 I think it was 2020, was not that big of a deal. It was just remote work, and,
Right.
basically, we made it up on the fly, and we had some stuff that we did online anyway, but, um, our district, like a lot of districts, just basically told students, "If you show up and you attempt something, we'll pass you anyway, this isn't your fault," and that's kinda the way it worked out at our school.
Mm,
I like to think that I had a little bit more tech savviness to give kids a better experience. A lot of them weren't really interested in, turning their cameras on and participating online, and I don't blame them for that. It wasn't a great situation. The year after, though, when everything was going crazy in price and everything was exploding for Pokemon, was the most difficult year of teaching that I've ever had. We had uh, online classes to do, in person classes to do, and a combo hybrid class to do all at the same time. So in my classroom, I had a webcam, kind of like right now, and a microphone, and I had to teach to the kids that were at home while there were other kids in my room sitting in their desks spaced
mm,
apart waiting
mm.
for me. Then I had to stop, leave the camera, go over to them, teach an entirely separate
Wow.
lesson. And then the kids that were hybrid were in every other day. Well, and then at home the other days. So then we had to come up with like a third layer of curriculum for those individuals. And so it was like teaching three
Trying to keep it all
classes
in sync.
simultaneously,
Wow.
and none of them could use like the same materials or assessments because each mode of instruction requires a different approach and a different, I don't know,
Mm,
set of tools, not to mention like what types of things will be more conducive for deterring cheating in an online environment versus in
right.
person where it can be monitored. So it was like doing 3 jobs at once, but knowing that all 3 were handicapped and doomed to fail. It was just something I would totally not recommend.
Mm,
It was really hard to get through that year.
mm, mm. So I can only imagine. For us, it was, I would say, quite simple. My kids were very young at that time. Um, and they did a couple of weeks of remote learning, but that didn't work out very well at all. And by that time, we actually had a tutor as well at the house, and then they ended up going back into school quite relatively quickly. And my youngest one was not even in school yet, so we were able to kind of skate through that in a much easier situation than you were. But we're in North Carolina, and they tend to, I would say, lessen the ropes a little bit, so they weren't as tight as probably they could have been. They had left some of the discretion, especially for private schools, up to the school and the directors to make their own decisions. So yeah, it wasn't quite that bad. But man, I'm sorry for that. So obviously, Pokemon took a complete hold for you during this time because you basically did nothing. It was just a
Yeah, I
school and that's it. Sleep. Yeah,
I'll be
school, sleep.
honest, there were times when I was like, "This is not what I signed up for. I can go make more money selling cards on eBay. I'm gonna put in my resignation, maybe come back to
This is
teaching
it.
in a few years once this nonsense is over." But, the relationship with the kids, even in that type of
Yeah.
environment where you still get to, like, banter and, jokingly tease each other is really the fun part of teaching, and it gradually picked up again, and even with the kids that were in class and some of the ones that were online that were really respectful and polite and engaged, you appreciate that as a teacher, and that's ultimately more important to me. Is like I want to have a career where I feel like I'm making an impact. And as much as I love Pokemon and enjoy collecting and making videos and packaging up cards that I've sold on eBay, it doesn't quite hit the same way as doing
No.
something where you feel like you're building relationships in a meaningful, tangible way.
Yeah, having that in-person connection to move somebody to a new level, and truly seeing their appreciation for your help, it's not the same as shipping out 100 orders and making double the money, but it's not the same. It's a good question, Chef. I actually had that as well. So, how do you, or do you intertwine your life of Pokemon into with your students, especially those who are maybe are already into Pokemon? You guys talk about it, after school or something. How does that?
Not really. I have a really strict
Okay.
policy of not doing any self-promoting in the
Okay.
classroom, and that goes for Pokemon. I also have, like I was a sponsored skater when I was in high school and through college, and so I do, like, YouTube videos and stuff of inline skating. I did one where I mixed some Pokemon in there, And that's the one that students are more inclined to connect with. I think for the vast majority, though, they're just blissfully unaware of the fact that their nerdy teacher in person is even more nerdy beyond the classroom than he
Love
is
it.
in the classroom. So
I
that's
love it.
fine with me. If any of them have watched my content though or enjoy it and they wanna talk to me about it, that's probably not a conversation that I would, like, let take up class time. I'd give a respectful, like, "Yeah, hey, thank you, I really appreciate that." But if they ever wanted to talk, like, on free time or before or after
Right.
school, they're more than welcome to do so.
Okay. All right. I was
Just a
curious if it came
professionalism
up.
piece. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be one of those things that I think, especially if you wore anything related to Pokemon, or if you put that Pikachu tail wiper on the back of your car, it's gonna be a dead giveaway. So
Yeah.
so be careful. They're gonna see you leaving and say, "Hey, he collects Pokemon."
That's fine, like, I'm not embarrassed about it. I think there was a time when, like, I didn't want people to know that I was, like, an avid Pokemon collector, and maybe there's a lot of people that resonate with that as well, where it was just like, I don't know, not necessarily the social convention where now it's almost trendy and hip to
Right.
be a collector of sports or Pokemon cards or whatever, uh, One Piece, uh, very trendy, but it's just something that I feel like would be unprofessional to take up time and instructional time away from actually teaching or helping kids to self-promote or talk about my hobbies and interests.
Well, there's got to be some English correlation to pronouncing the Pokemon names and
Yeah,
the
some phonemic
origins.
awareness.
We can work this in. We can work it in. Well,
No,
I
kids,
like it.
in their reading instruction nowadays aren't taught phonemic awareness, which is the ability to, like, sound out words. They have more of,
Mm.
like, a sight reading, memory-based technique for reading. At least that's the popular trend in elementary schools. I'm not an elementary teacher, and I believe they're starting to trend back in the direction of phonics. And so, I don't know, maybe there's some magic there where we'll just throw the really difficult to pronounce Pokemon names at kids and be like, "If you can learn these, you're well on your way to being an avid reader."
Yeah, we definitely helped our sons work with phonics, do handwriting because they were taking handwriting out of school. No offense to you, Matt, or anybody who loves math, but doing math the original way, not these new ways. So we had to incorporate some of that into their homework time, the extra stuff. So
I don't
yeah,
understand new math.
it the whole. Have you seen some of it? The way they actually teach them how to do the
Yeah.
counting,
Yeah,
like
I
the
get it. It's like
bubble.
the idea of, like, visualizing the processes that are
Right.
happening, but I'm like, "This is, like, 5 additional steps." At least the
Exactly.
math problems that I've seen, I don't wanna write off all the math instructors there and delegitimize the work that they're doing, but, it just seems so unnecessary to me.
I had I won't go too far into this, but I definitely had a conversation with a teacher last year, and he had done all of his math the way that we taught him and the way we had the tutor teach him, which was just vertical, normal, subtraction,
Yeah.
addition. And he got them all right, the answers. But then she said, "Well, you didn't show your work in the way that we wanted you to show it, which was this other way." And when we were testing him at home, like he knew the answer without even writing it down. He just knew what the answer was because that's the way we taught him. And I said, "Well, if he already knows the answer and he can do the equation and get the answer, do we really need to go through the steps that are really only supposed to be there to help you achieve the answer in the first place? If he already got the result, do we really have to go back and do that? Because it's a lot of extra work." She says, "Yeah, well, I'm sorry. It's just the way they want us to do it." I said, "Okay, we'll do it, but doesn't seem like a good use of my time." But
Well,
well,
just think how the kids feel, right? 'Cause they're going through their step-by-step process of drawing an entire mountain range to do an addition problem and
it's
moving
crazy.
it to the top of the mountain like, "Oh, the number 1's on the summit. Now we've gotta bring it down to the." I don't even know if I'm making this up, but that's what it looks like to me.
Exactly. Exactly right, chef. Just carry the one. That's it. Just carry the one, add it, go down. That's it. Exactly. All right. Well, we'll jump off that one. We'll jump off that one. One of the things I was really curious about, though, is you are very cautious with how you sell. So talk to us a little bit about your selling approach, because you make sure that you articulate yourself very clearly in ensuring that you're selling extra cards up front. This is how you fund X, Y, or Z, and you're very cautious with that approach. So what exactly is the approach in terms of how you sell and where you sell, and what was it you'd like to convey to the buying audience, I guess, in a way?
I feel like that question needs a little more clarification. In what way do you feel that I'm cautious about my selling?
There's a few times where I watched, and you mentioned, with all full disclosure, I sell the extras in order to that I don't need for my collection in order to fund X, Y, or Z, and making sure that you're telling your YouTube audience how you're selling, so you can make sure that that transparency was there. That's what I was referring to.
Sure. Well, I guess I just like letting people know that I am a collector as well and that there are things that I'm holding on into my personal collection. Maybe it's just a piece of like establishing credibility within the community, but I
Okay.
also want people to like look back at my other videos and my other things as well and see me as a collector and hopefully appreciate those because that's the whole reason why I went into making YouTube videos in the first place was to showcase my collection. But I think part of it too is like I like to showcase the cards that I am selling, not necessarily just through the high resolution photos on eBay, but also
Mm,
giving them some screen time and airtime on the channel so people can get a better look at those. In terms of selling platforms, I've had a few different platforms and like brands reach out. Not many. I'm not that big of a YouTuber by any means, but a few reach out for things, and I just prefer to do it on my own. I don't necessarily want to be connected with companies that I'm not familiar with, that I don't know their past, their future, their sales, their
right.
business practices, their ethics. And I like to just do it myself. I don't want to deal with any like third party service or have people
Contractual
send me their
obligations.
cards and
Yeah.
sell them. There are some great consignment services out there. I don't want to like knock them. That's just not for me. I've always enjoyed grading my own cards, buying my own cards, selling my own cards. And I think it's just part of that process that I enjoy. So it's not necessarily a cautionary approach. It's just
Okay.
making sure
Okay.
that there's transparency, but also that I'm doing it in a way that I can have fun.
Okay. And I can definitely agree with you on the process. There's something special about buying a binder collection and just being able to flip through somebody's collection and just the joy of looking through that. It's, oh man, I need these for the collection. I can fill this in with my binder. It's a very special moment when you get that package in the mail and you get to kind of flip through the binder for the first time in person. It's very nice.
It's a feeling that I could really only compare to, like, literally being a kid at Christmas time,
Hmm.
and for
Exactly.
years and years when I was buying collections more regularly than I am now, though there are still occasions where I'm able to pick some stuff up, you don't necessarily know what you're gonna get, like, you see pictures and you have this image in your mind of a best case scenario, worst case scenario, you maybe
Exactly.
crunch the numbers and see, like, what the
Yep.
maximum bottom line is, what the worst case, like, profit loss is going to be, but then when you get the cards, you get to flip through them all, to actually take them out, carefully inspect them
Yep.
under a direct light
It's
source
it's
from
it's so
every angle.
nice.
And part of that is, seeing what you've purchased, but also there's that appreciation piece of the cards, and every card is
Mm.
unique. And even though I've seen 1,000 Neo Discovery Umbreons, every single one is one that I'm going to stop and like take a very careful look at because it's one of my favorite artworks.
Yeah, it's one of those moments. I think you said it well. As you're going through those, and to really, it's almost a little bit of a gamble too. Say, okay, is what I have placed my money bet on going to be what my expectation was? And sometimes you get a little bit disappointed, but the better you get, at that fielding process, um, the more realistic your expectations are to reality, and it's just a blast. Yeah, chaos. I see your question. I'll actually answer that or ask that here in just a little bit. So hang tight, buddy. We'll get to that one.
I like that
Uh,
question, by the way.
yes, yes. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about some of those. We'll actually do some of that as well in the rapid fire. You did mention that you were selling on a single platform, or you sell on multiple platforms. Are you selling primarily on eBay nowadays, or do you have other avenues that you try to get your cards out with?
Yeah, I basically just sell on eBay.
Okay.
I've sold some cards on PWCC before. I've never sent any to any other like consignment
Oh shit. Okay.
sites. Um, I've had some people like reach out through Instagram or through like private messages and done some directly through PayPal, but that's really more of the exception.
Okay.
And then I guess like conventions. I've gone to a few conventions, not all that many, and selling in person is probably the most fun because that's where you actually get that human to human interaction. And I feel like at those events, even if I don't sell anything, if I get to have a conversation with somebody about the cards, like that's just as good as actually selling something.
I watched your recap on the Denver Collecticon from last year. That was a blast. It looks like, which made me wonder. Do you actually vend at Collecticons, or is that something that you don't necessarily prefer to be a buyer and walk the floor?
All right, so story time. At the
Go
Denver
for it.
Collecticon, I had an all access pass, so I could film anywhere. I even got to go up on stage and
Uh,
film Jason Page on
I was
stage.
wondering how you got that footage. It's like, what
Yeah,
do you do?
and so that
What do
was
you do?
wonderful. But part of that was I wanted to be able to use that and film everything, as many things as possible from every angle as possible. And all the guys there were very kind and gracious and giving me a little bit of table space that I didn't even pay for. So thank you to everybody that allowed me to vend with you. And that was great, by the way. A lot of friends there. But I threw out some cards. I didn't bring that many with me. And I would vend for like half an hour to an hour.
Okay.
And then I'd be like, all right, pack it up and then go film for a while for the next 3 hours. And then come back, set out the cards again, and then sell for another hour, and then pack them all up and then go film for another few hours. So I was all over the place. Honestly, it was kind of a nice break because it's a lot of standing when you're just there vending.
Yeah.
So I got to mix it up, and then it allowed me to talk to people and walk the venue, see the different vendors and what they were selling as well. So I think that's the best way to do it. Probably not the most efficient from like a money management standpoint.
Well, and especially if you're traveling and you have a lot of costs invested in, hotels and things, you might want to make some of the money back. Was that a local one for you in
No,
Denver?
I'm in Minnesota, and that one was
Ah,
Denver. So
okay.
it
Okay.
was an expensive weekend. I definitely didn't sell enough to cover my expenses. I wasn't expecting to. I didn't bring that many cards. I think I brought like 40 slabs, and maybe that might have been it. So
Okay.
just a few things, sold a few things, helped put a dent in the bill. I was there for a social experience more so.
Yeah.
It is
Well,
nice
the
being
video
able to
was
sell
great.
some stuff though too, so you can justify it as a business expense.
That's right. That's right. Um, Probably with the one of the best recaps of a Collecticon. I mean, again, it goes back to your video editing and how you create, your content, which we'll talk about in a minute. But well done, and I love seeing all the guys there. It seems like everybody was there, and you guys were just having a complete blast. And
It
I
was
would
one
have
of the
been,
best experiences.
I would have been probably much like you. As you said, I'm the same way. I usually get up early. I don't stay up late. I mean, these podcasts are probably the latest that I stay up, honestly. And I would struggle once it starts hitting 12 and 1. I'm like, oh, okay.
That was
Like
me. We
I'm
had
an
that
old man.
party going on, and I'm like, it was like midnight, and I'm like, I gotta go,
Can't
everybody. And everybody else was
can't
just
do it.
getting started. I'm
I
also not
know.
much of a partier. I don't drink, I don't smoke or
Okay.
anything. So uh just hanging out, having pizza with the guys and opening up cards, talking about cards. It was a great time.
Yeah, it looked like it was a blast. I loved it. One of the things I also noticed as I looked through and you're saved as one of my saved sellers, by the way, on eBay as well. Um, I looked through there today, and I looked through there in the past. And what I like that you do in one of the ways is how you present, in a sense, the sets. So you do like the hollows, rares, non-hollows, and you sell them as a set because you mentioned earlier about all the duplicates you have from all the collection buyouts, and that seemed like a really good way for you to get rid of some of your, I don't want to call it bulk, but the
It is.
unwanted parts of your collection. How do you see that in terms of success? Do you do better with graded cards, singles, or doing the set concept? How have you seen that play out for you as a seller?
Well, in all my time selling, it's almost been exclusively graded cards just because
Okay.
the value of selling individual cards versus the time commitment of listing, photographing, packaging,
Mm,
shipping was something that wasn't worth the time and the effort to me. Having said that, I've gone through a lot of cards. I've bought a lot of collections. I have a ton of bulk. I recently, over the summer, made a video of organizing over
that was a good one.
10,000
Yeah.
cards that have just been stashed away in no sequential order or organizational system. And so after I've gone through
Mm,
that, I'm like, I should start listing some of this bulk. And so I took a lot of the cards that were there and started putting together complete
okay.
common and uncommon sets. And then I had some rares as well. So I put some together that were complete non-hollow sets. And that's a relatively new thing for my store. I've
Okay.
only
Okay.
had sets listed for the last 6 months. Sold a few. Vast majority haven't sold. I have most of them I have like 5 or 6 at least of each non-hollow set. So,
Wow.
there's other ones
Okay.
that I could relist. Again, it's just a matter of time where this
Okay.
is of secondary priority to me than teaching. Teaching is gonna take up the first priority, and whatever time I have left over is dedicated to the things I enjoy, like this, doing this podcast, for example, or listing cards on eBay. Today, I took some photos. I recently found my giant boxes of Magic the Gathering cards in storage and went, "You know what? I might as well organize those as well because those have been sitting there forever." And I know a lot less about those, so that was a matter of
Yeah,
like, what symbol
research
is this? Like, what even set is this? I don't remember. So it was fun though, and it was
yeah,
something to do as football was on, and I could,
yeah.
occasionally look up at the TV and sort some cards.
I was wondering what
Barely
the TV above your head was for. It's for sorting and watching something entertaining. Okay,
something like that, yeah. I have it connected as, like, a secondary monitor, but it also duals as a TV, so I can watch
okay.
movies or, sometimes I'll put up what I'm editing there, and I'll have the timeline down below, but the preview window up above.
Ah, okay, okay. So I saw your desk setup, and I was like, that's a really nice setup, by the way.
Thank you.
And some good inspiration ideas for sure. And again, that goes back to the comments we made earlier on the artwork. I love how you just sprinkle that throughout. But I saw that TV and I was like, what is he using the TV for directly above the monitor? But I guess that makes good sense. You're doing the preview up top, timeline at the bottom, and then working through the content, maybe sorting in the meantime. Okay,
Often, yeah, or sometimes I'll just have, like, a podcast going up above on YouTube
okay,
while I'm working down below or typing up a script on one half of the screen,
okay.
and
Good
I like
stuff.
to pretend like I'm good at multitasking, I'm really not.
Yeah, when I have a really good podcast that I want to pay attention to, and I think it was PK, he made a comment, and I have to agree with him because when I watch your videos, I can't really be doing something else because I keep looking over because I want to see what you're showing us. And so I can't be focused on trying to order cards or sort by sets or do something that requires my attention. I say, okay, well, if I'm gonna watch his videos, I have to sit down, stay focused, and watch this video. If it's something else, and sometimes I can let them run in the background because it's mostly audio. But yours has a nice twist in the quality. It's like, well, I don't want to miss all the awesome video editing he's done here. So let me
Well, that's
stop
the
what I'm doing.
greatest compliment you could offer me because that's the goal is to hopefully pull in enough B-roll and enough other types of shots that it has some visual interest. Takes a lot of time to edit and to do that, but, I'm glad people appreciate that. That's something that's intentionally a labor of love.
Yeah. I tell my wife when I first started editing YouTube videos and getting into I use Final Cut Pro and having some output there. She's an engineer, and I said, "Sweetheart, you would really like the detail orientation and the process of going through this and refining it, and it's very satisfying, and you get to see that immediate result as you're kind of working through the video and slicing and adding music and overlay, and it's just nice. It's enjoyable."
Whenever I make a particularly complicated video and people ask me like, "Oh, is it fun?" My answer to that is usually like, well, the first hour is fun, the last hour is fun, and then the 20 hours in between is just mindless tedium of just
Yeah.
wishing it were over. So at least it has that progression where like it starts out
Right.
fun as you're seeing it take shape for the first time, and then you see the final product at the end.
It's kind of like that relationship with the girl. He's like, it was great when we met. I don't know what happened. I forgot all this stuff in the middle that led to the breakup.
The dating was good, the divorce was even better.
Yeah, exactly. Why did we get divorced? I don't remember. I don't remember. We got another 5 a.m. gang there. Glad to see it's not just us, Ernie. Glad you joined us. Let's see. Card party. We'll go ahead and mention that one. Thanks, Chaos. You going to card party next year?
I'm really hoping so. It's
Okay.
actually working out this year where last year Pat had mentioned it to me and
Oh,
reached out and he's like, "Really love to get you at Card. It's such an honor to be invited." But it came on our very last day of school. And I'm like, I don't think I
oh
can
yeah.
miss the
That's
last day
right.
of school. We got a graduation ceremony. It's last chance to see kids. There's grades that need to be updated. So that was a bummer. It's about a week later this year. So it'll be during my summer. So it looks very, very positive and
Doable.
favorable,
Okay.
pending any like weird situation or family issue going on. But more than likely, I'll be there.
Good. Good. He moved it just for you, right?
I think so. Yeah. That's what I'm telling myself.
He moved it so you would show up. That's perfect.
He also asked me, like, "If you could travel to anywhere in the country, where do you wanna go?" And I was like, "Florida." And
Hawaii.
he's like, "Alright, let's do it."
Perfect. Well, you have all the good recommendations. He figured good quality content. He's gonna know how to host this next card party. So that's it. We're gonna take all of his recommendations.
Well, Orlando would be perfect for me because I have relatives in Orlando, and I
Oh,
love
nice.
I love the beach. I love,
Hmm.
Universal Studios, and it's just a good excuse to also vacation. And to be able to do that with other card enthusiasts, especially if we, like, put together a Universal Studios outing or a Disney outing, I'd be all about that.
Well, you better bring a lot of extra hard disk space to store all the video you're going to capture during that event. That's for sure. Agree, Wonder. PC has good content. It's hard to zombie mode for sure, for sure. Minnesota? No. Here we go. So classics from Minnesota. Yeah, there it is.
Canterbury hat logo out in
He
Minnesota.
saw it. He
Horse track.
spotted it. He spotted it.
I have
All
no
right.
affiliation with Canterbury Park. I've been there a couple of times. The hat was a gift from my sister-in-law, and ever since then, it's become like my go-to hat for being on screen.
Yeah, between that one and the shirt, I think that's because I watched some of the older videos and I saw you wearing a different shirt, and it just popped out at me like so quickly. Like, whoa, it's a pink shirt. I didn't
I
realize
have
he was
like
wearing it.
3 shirts that I specifically wear whenever I make a video now, just out of habit. I promise you all, I do have other clothes in my wardrobe that I wear and other hats. It just feels right now, like it's part of the character.
Right, right. It's this theme. It's just how we know you. If you're not wearing that, we wouldn't even recognize it. Who's this guy? He's calling himself Pokemon Classics. We have to call Matt. He's an imposter. All right, man. We talked about some of the sound. I think that was a good way for us to transition. What I would like to maybe hear is your balance between collecting and selling. And I think before we get there is you mentioned business expense, but do you actually have a business behind what you do in Pokemon in order to have a better financial sitting and tax write-offs, or you just run this personally as a hobby and everything runs through more of a personal account, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, more or less, it's kind of both. It's a sole proprietorship situation,
Okay.
so, it is run as a business, but as a personal one, I haven't, like, done nearly enough sales to justify forming an S corp or anything like that.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I've been buying
Right.
things raw, grading them, reselling some of the things, so there are certainly some business expenses that go into it, shipping, obviously.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Well, and that's good because it makes the question I was going to ask kind of a bit more, I would say, relative to what we're going to say here is, you know, a lot of times when we talk to Dan, we talk to Nick, we talk to, a lot of the guys in the hobby, and they all had collections, but then that collection turned into inventory. The inventory got sold, and then they kind of lost that collection in the process. And everything's inventory now. And as I go through a lot of these podcasts and those who have businesses, I'm curious how they balance the business and selling with the collection because that sometimes it's a challenge to do. What's been your approach that's worked for you so far?
Yeah, I think what's easy for me in this case is I have very defined collection goals. And so it's really easy to separate out which items I'm going to keep. And then, those don't factor into a cost of goods or any of the related expenses when it comes to thinking about a traditional business. Um, Also, when I'm looking for other items, you can buy them on a separate credit card and just keep the finances separate. So that's relatively easy. The hard part in all of this is determining which cards are the ones that I'm going to be going after for my own personal collection. I mentioned some of the bigger ones that I'm kind of in a stalemate with. I don't have to worry about the ones that I already have because those ones are just part of the personal collection and they are not going to become inventory. At least I don't anticipate that unless dire
Hope not.
needs happen.
Hope not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cross the fingers on that one. But all the stuff that is extra, I don't mind putting into inventory and making it into, business related sales because then that's part of what allows me to buy some of those other frivolous items like 100 celebrations packs to open to start a new set or buying the, sealed packages of the W stamp promos with the magazine still
Right.
intact and then framing them and throwing them up on the wall. Little items like that are the things that I'm chasing beyond just the larger items. And then I guess one of the other places where it gets tricky is when I do happen to stumble across one of those collections and buy it and grade cards. And it's like, all right, if this one comes back as a 10, this one's going into the personal collection. If it comes back as a 9, I already have a 9, so then it's going into business inventory. I'm on a relatively
Okay.
low volume comparatively to a lot of those other sellers like Dan and Nick that you mentioned, where they're making like a legitimate business out of this where they are doing a lot of sales
Yeah.
compared to me. I have like 200 eBay listings, but I do all right. And it's like I said, something that comes secondary to my primary job of teaching. And I enjoy the balance of it. I enjoy the challenge of it. And um, yeah, I don't really know what else to say. It's
Okay.
small, but it's something that I enjoy doing.
Yeah, and It's good when you do that because and we won't get into too much of the details, and obviously we can move on if that's something you're uncomfortable with. But when you have a business that runs some of that, and you also have a full time job, it actually works well together if you manage that financially correct. And we had a lot of that already in the last session with Terry. But there's a lot of tax benefits there too, and you can really work that out in your favor. Make the most of the hobby, make the most of selling what you're not going to use in your collection, but then also financially benefit your full time job as well. And when it comes tax time, and yeah, so there's a lot of good things to do there.
And I am certainly not Dan. He is Mr. Optimization. I am anything but that. I don't always sell at the best point when it's the best point to sell. I don't necessarily optimize the grading versus the raw items. I envy that about him. He does it like a tactician.
He's a
But like I said,
machine.
it's something I enjoy
Yeah,
doing. So when I have time for certain things, I'll be
yeah.
like, all right, well, I guess I'm going through this box and seeing what I'm going to keep and what I'm going to sell. And all right, bought this collection. It's been sitting on the shelf for the last 3 months. I guess I'll finally get around to going through those. 5 months later, there's
Yeah.
a submission going to PSA. 6 months after that, the cards are back and graded. Maybe 4 months after I got them listed and on eBay. 2 years have elapsed. Then you go, wow, should have done this 2 years ago when prices were better.
See,
But
whoops.
but you know what? That's part
Yeah,
of life. It's just the
no,
experience, and it's all about the experience.
I would agree with you. I talk a lot to my wife, and we have moments of challenge and work and work life and the kids. And one of the phrases I always remind her of is, I say, if we die tomorrow, it's what did we do today, right? And the things that we tend to be stressed about and worried about, and craziness of life and corporate environment and kids schedules, and a lot of those things don't matter, because if today was the last day, you'd be like, yeah, whatever, right? Did we hug the kids? Did we? And they say, hey, daddy, let's go play a game of TCG Live. Did I stop and make time to play that game? Or I say, hey, I'm too busy. So it's those moments. So I would agree with you. Those experiences. Yeah. We got some hellos from Maybucks. Maybe some people from your side of the neighborhood. Looks like. Let's see if I missed anything here. Yep, we got some Sweet Home FLA. That's right. That's right. He
It's
said,
not about to be sweet for the next 6 months when we're plunged underneath 5 feet of snow.
"Yeah, it's nice for about a week, and after that, it's like, okay, this is old." I came from Ohio, so
Okay, so
yeah,
you know.
yeah. He said, "I assumed you came back from hunting." So he always goes hunting and then does his recordings directly after. Right, perfect.
For being in Minnesota, I am not really a hunter or a fisher. I used to do
No,
some fishing when I was younger, but I don't have the patience for it. Like fishing for sunfish is kind of
really.
fun because you get regular bites, but anything beyond that, you might be waiting for an hour, maybe multiple hours, maybe not get a bite at all. And I don't know, I always feel like I should be doing something. So those types of outdoorsy activities have never really appealed to me.
It's funny because I see you as a very patient man, so maybe it's you don't feel productive enough.
I think that's the better way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're very patient. You wouldn't be able to put out the video quality content you do if you weren't that patient. So the 20 hours we talked about a pain in the middle.
Yeah. If nothing else, the way you phrased it was a lot more flattering than the way I put it. So we'll go with that.
Check. Moving on to the next one. Um, so moving then over a little bit to your ideas and experiences in grading. We joke a lot, and the time has passed, and we're not Mr. Machine Dan at Catch-Em-All Collectibles. You're running thousands of cards every day, and to be fair, that's what he does for a living. So
Yeah. And
I'm
he's
glad
really
he's
good
able to
at it.
do it, and
One
he's
of the
very,
best.
very good at it. Exactly. Um, but you've learned a lot regardless in your grading process. Could you maybe share with us a little bit about how do you pre-grade? What's some of the things you're looking for? Because again, you're focused purely on vintage, and that does have some differences, excuse me, similarities as well on the modern side. But what's your pre-grading process look like, and what kind of tools do you use?
Yeah, so I'll start by acknowledging that I primarily grade with PSA, and I have since 2011, I think is when I first had my membership there. So it's been over a decade. The process has always been the same for me, and that's to find the mintiest cards possible and to inspect them extremely carefully. I think there are a lot of people that maybe overlook some of the more subtle nuanced damage that goes into vintage. more specifically with holographic cards, you really need
Hmm.
to be aware of print lines, and a lot of times, you're not even gonna be able to see those under regular light source. You need to have, like, an LED light shined at specific angles,
Yeah.
and oftentimes they'll just go horizontally across the card, and the darker the holofoil pattern is, the more it obscures those print lines. So sometimes there might be there, but, like, the ink is covering them up, so you can't even see them. At least that's my assumption. But on the lighter ones in particular, it bleeds through a lot more easily, and so some of those are easier to catch. In my experience, cards with print lines have instantly been docked down to a 9 on PSA scale, sometimes an 8, depending
Hmm.
on, like, the severity of it and how strict PSA feels like being with that particular submission. Edge wear on the backside is probably the most common type of damage that people should look for and hopefully realize to
Okay.
look for. You get the little dots in the corners and
Hmm.
sometimes on the edges, and that's a little bit more flexible. I've seen some cards come through that have
Right.
noticeable edge wear that have gotten better grades. Some that are like completely free of it have gotten an 8. So there's always going to be some inconsistency with that. Centering is something else that I think a lot of people are more aware of now than they used to be. And the threshold on the centering on the back side is significantly more loose than it is on the front sides of the cards. And I do feel like that's something that
Mm.
pretty much every grading company is almost like unnecessarily strict about. Uh, I don't know if they're, like, out there with a micrometer measuring centering on the nose, but I think a lot of times when people get a grade that they feel like is undergraded, there might be some of that side to side or top
Small.
to
Yeah.
bottom centering that's perhaps not noticeable initially when people are looking for the more obvious conditional factors.
Right.
So that's usually my process is high intensity light, look over the card in every conceivable way, hopefully mitigate some of the issues with surprise grading results. I
Right.
have been the victim of that before, but I'd say my pre-grading system and consistency is actually pretty good.
Your last return video was, I mean, almost spot on. I think there was only one or two you were surprised about. Pretty much everything else got exactly what you were anticipating.
And to be fair, like, I didn't make a video beforehand sending them out being like, "These are my pre-grades," so people were taking my word for it, but,
We trust
I'll
you, Matt.
yeah, thank you. The cards that I was sending out, like, very few of them were ones that I considered to be 10 candidates to begin with. Um, they were ones that are still worth grading at a 9 condition or
Right.
perhaps some of them even an 8, so that's why, optimizing some of the resale value on those extras. But, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people make it out to be with, um, companies withholding grades or intentionally lowering grades. Some of the ones that I've seen come through in the past had higher grades than I was expecting. Some of them were
Right.
lower, and that's just the law of averages, I guess.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do. I shouldn't say a lot of it. I should say, a perspective of it that has to do with just the learning curve of how to pre-grade. Not having done it, and not knowing what to expect, especially if you're going across companies. And you had a really great video comparing some of the differences between CGC and PSA, and where they're maybe harsher in one area versus another. So, really, really great content there. But having not gone through that experience 10, 20, 30, 100 times, um, you just you're just not as good at it like anything else. How good do you expect to be the first and second time, right?
Well, and I will throw this in too. I had some modern cards in this submission as well as my last couple of submissions. Not
Hmm.
many, but the 10 rate on those is significantly higher. And that's probably something that anybody will tell you, especially somebody like Dan
Right.
who grades regularly or Nick, that PSA is much easier to grade modern in than it is with vintage. And so I'm wondering too if part of the perception is people that have become more accustomed to assessing modern cards, and then when they send in vintage, they're
Hmm.
seeing lower than
That's a good
expected
point.
results based on that. And I don't necessarily know why that is, if the card condition is just significantly better on modern as a whole. I guess I haven't handled enough or graded enough to really be the judge of that. Or if it's just because it's a lower price value that PSA isn't putting the same amount of attention into applying their grading standards and maybe just flipping modern cards through fast.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure, but, I will say the modern cards that I graded were a much, much, much higher
Easier.
percentage in 10 than any of the vintage ones.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I've never thought about that before, Matt. A lot of times, especially if you have new people entering the collection hobby, may start off with the modern and move into vintage, and having graded perhaps some of those modern first, and then not getting those same grades when they move over. That's a good point on the transition. That may think it's just a lot harsher, or something else is happening behind the scenes. But I would be always be curious and wonder, how does PSA treat the different areas, or the vintage versus modern? Do they give, okay, hey, you have, if it's over this dollar amount, then you need to spend double the time. If it's below that, then you're allowed to spend 2 minutes. Whatever the case is.
Yeah, and this would be nothing but speculation on
Of
my
course,
part,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I assume that a grading company, whether it's PSA or any, are going to be more careful with
Hmm.
higher value cards in the grading process because of
They have
the
to stand
legal
behind it.
obligations to like
Yeah.
reimburse for overgrading than they would if there's a lower value card where the situation, the negative that they have to compensate somebody for is just a drop in the bucket rather than something more substantial.
I would agree. I mean, they want to stand behind it. And if it's a $50,000 card versus a $5,000 card, I would hope they'd spend a little more time on it, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's presumably why they have the different service
Yeah,
tiers, right?
exactly, exactly. I meant to ask you something, going back to the sorting between your collection and the business, and kind of going through inventory. Do you also go back and say, hey, I have a 10 in this, but is it a strong 10? Let me look at the 10 I just got and see if it's a better 10, and I'm going to switch them out because I want the best of the best. Do you get to that level of kind of nuance and tweaking?
Yeah, so that's happened on a number of occasions, but I
Yeah.
become sentimentally attached to the one that was first in the collection, so it doesn't
Okay.
even matter if the next one is better. Or
Okay.
sometimes that thought has gone through my mind where I'm like, "Ah, this one is better, but this one has been with me for 10 years. All right, we gotta be loyal to the one that's been here for a while."
Okay. Because when I, for myself, speaking in the same context, when I'm a binder collector. I'm not much of a graded card collector. And as I'm going through sets, I said, "Well, yeah, I have that card, but I don't think it was in as good of a condition as this one I got from a collection buyout." And I have to look at them. So now I'm going through card by card, saying, "Okay, which one is the one I want to keep, and which one's better?" And it takes a lot of time. It takes a
Yeah,
lot
and
of
I
time.
think I think it would make more sense in that context where as I'm looking at it as the one that's collecting it, I'm like, the 10s are pretty much comparable regardless, like, you might have some really minuscule difference
Small,
between the
yeah.
2. And if it's gonna be in my collection, I'm the only one that's looking at it or noticing it. It's not like there's a resale difference. It's not like there's, any other external factors to worry about. Then it just becomes this matter of, like, personal loyalty to the card where I have this obligation where I'm like, "Ah, this been one's been with me so long. This is the first one I graded. I can't
I
do it."
held this in 1999. I can't do it.
Well, like,
Mm.
it's not even necessarily a card that was part of my original, like, collecting as a child. It might have been something that I bought, but if I bought it in 2012 and graded it in 2013, and it's been part of a near complete set for a long time, and I'm adding things to it, then there's just that sense of loyalty to that existing card rather than the one that just walked in the door, which,
Right.
in all fairness, might have been with me equally long, just not graded as recently.
That's right. It was in the pile. It was
Yeah.
waiting. It was waiting. Which is an interesting thought, because I had this experience this year. Have you had to get rid of something out of your collection that's really bothered you, and you didn't want to, but you had to for whatever reason? Just a one piece, or maybe it was something you collected that was not Pokemon before?
I don't think I've ever had to.
Okay, that's good.
There have been, like, things that I've sold that I regretted later on, and then I was like, "Oh, maybe I should have collected that," or I started a collection later on, and then I'm like,
Mm.
"Oh, now I need to get that one back at a higher price point." Like, that's
Yay
happened
me.
before, but I've never been
Okay,
I'm fortunate enough where I've never been in a dire enough financial situation where I'm like, "Well, I have to sell something for my collection. What am I going to sell?" And then, having to
good,
choose which of the
good.
children gets thrown out, but,
Right.
I mean, I guess the day could come someday where that happens, and if it does, like, the real world will always take precedent over the cardboard. As
Right.
much as I
Right.
enjoy shiny cardboard, life is more important, people are more important, health, wellness,
Of
etcetera.
course. Yeah.
Um, but as long as I'm doing alright, it's something that I'm going to enjoy.
I hope you never have to go through that experience.
Thank you.
I got one here from Chef again. He says he loves the grading videos. Loves them.
I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
I enjoy them too. Because you mentioned it well here, and you said you want to give those some screen time. And so as you went through one of your last return videos, I just like how you articulate through it. You kind of talk through a little bit. You still also give some education on the card, or maybe the rarity symbol, or just some little nuance. And I think just it's a nice little touch, and I appreciate those.
Yeah, so that's like the reason why I started my YouTube channel in the first place was I wanted to showcase the cards, especially the ones that were in my collection that I'm not necessarily accessing on a regular basis, and at
Hmm.
least be able to have a video to go back to and be like,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, those the cards. I can see where the hollow patterns were and,
Right.
looking through all of them." And then the hope was that other people would enjoy that and then perhaps learn something about those cards since I do have that emotional attachment. I do have the history of knowing what it was like when those cards were released, which ones were playable, which ones were hard to find, the different errors that were in those sets. So hopefully providing a little bit of an educational piece in tandem with that personal goal of just documenting my collection.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, Matt, because you just actually reminded me because I think I watched some of your earliest videos some time ago, and that's the exact reason when you were talking. I think in the very first video, you were talking about documenting your collection so you'd have it for the future, if nothing else, but for yourself. And that's kind of the
Yeah.
journey was started there. So yeah, okay.
That
Make
was
sure
the
that
hope
may,
was to have it as like a
yeah,
tool for myself to look back on. And then if people
yeah.
found it interesting, great. That would just be an additional bonus.
I do have one that might be a little bit of a spicy topic for you though, because with your recent PSA and CGC video and outlining the details, you pointed out that the CGC labels they look really good, and there's some things there you like, but you're already invested into PSA. You got your collection there. Obviously, replacing that is just not an option. If you had it to do over again today, would you start with a different grading company?
I honestly don't know. I do really like the way the CGC label looks, and I like the slab. Like more so than the label, I really like the slab and how it's I don't know, I guess more like crystal clear type of case, and there's a little bit more room, and I
Right.
think it accentuates the cards better. If if all things were taken into consideration, I feel like I would end up going the PSA route still just
Okay.
in terms of value. Since they tend to have the better resale value, and so that would help mitigate some of the costs by reselling the ones that didn't grade as 10s that left my collection. And having said that, I should clarify too, I do have 9s in my collection. They're like the spot savers until a 10 comes along for some of those sets. So some of them have been there
Just in
for a
case.
long time and probably will be in perpetuity. But, I feel like the analytical business side of my brain would still wanna go that direction, though the, like, displayability and, aesthetic side would pick the CGC slab.
Yeah. I haven't held a pristine yet, but they look nice. I must say, it looks really nice. Uh, Matt likes One Piece? Question mark.
I know almost nothing about One Piece. I know what it is. I know that
Yeah,
there's cards that were released for it. I'm
yeah.
familiar with the fact that Netflix released a live action version of the anime, but that's about my extent of knowledge for One Piece.
Yeah, I got sports cards from when I was a kid. Baseball, basketball. I mean, I still keep all those. There. Some of them right there behind me, still somewhere over there.
90s
Um,
basketball was a great time.
Oh man, I got the number of Michael Jordans and Magic Johnsons and David Robinsons and all these cards that I got. I went through them at the beginning of this year. It was such a trip down memory lane. I broke out a big, foldable table, laid them all out, and just reorganized them. Made sure I had them in proper, binders and boxes, and it was a blast. I loved it.
That's gonna be my next project now. Once I'm done organizing all the big boxes of Magic cards, it's gonna be the sports cards next, and I'm sure those ones are absolutely destroyed because I was
Yeah.
just a little kid, like, folding
Hmm.
them in half and carrying them around in my pocket, but I loved sports growing up, especially basketball and football were the 2 that I was really passionate about in the '90s.
Yeah, yeah. Mine was basketball. I played a lot. I probably have the worst binder. A little fun trip down memory lane here. The worst binder. I don't know who would have gave this to me. It was probably a school binder, and I turned it into like a sports card binder because in the front lip, as you open it up, it had like a metal clipboard built into it, and,
Did you
and then
clip
I
your
had
cards in there?
no, but I obviously had many of those binders, and I had stickers all over them, like all kids do, and I had them stacked. So then all this weight and that metal just clip just pushed down like through half of the cards. So the whole top row is just completely ruined on like majority of all those cards. I was like, yeah, but that's all
Whoever
right.
invented, like, metal binders to begin with, for collecting trading cards and sports cards, I don't know about that person.
You know, what I think they did is they said, we have these, 3 ring binders for paper. How can we shove some sports cards in? Let's make these sleeves. Now we'll make it a whole thing. We'll resell the same things we were selling in school supplies. We'll sell them over here in sports, and they just didn't think through the longevity of that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
There were a lot of
Now,
collections that I purchased were card number 1 in the set, card number 4 in the set, card number
hmm
7 in the set, binder
ruined.
dents.
Yeah.
And if you're talking first edition base set, there's nothing worse than buying that collection, pulling out the Charizard, and finding a nice big binder dent in it.
Especially if they kept them in order,
Yeah,
because you know
it's
you know exactly what's going to be in those spots. You're like, oh
yep,
no.
it's Alakazam, toast, my favorite Pokemon. Then you get Charizard, the most valuable one, toasted.
Yep.
Then Hitmonchan, one of the hardest ones to grade, gone.
Yep. Gone. Yep. Put that in the stack. We'll deal with that in 2 years.
Yep.
All right. All right. Well, let's keep it moving. One other thing I was wanting to talk about on the grading perspective before we jump off of that was your thoughts, if you have any, on Alpha Investments and his new grading company involvement and kind of what that could be, because he could have some potential traction in the future. Obviously, it's gonna take some time. He's got to build the trust and grow the business. So they're still growing at a very small rate, but that's an interesting dynamic. I was wanting to get your thoughts on that. Have you thought about that a little bit? Have you given it
Yeah,
any
so let me give you a
consideration?
quick synopsis, and you can correct me if I have any misinformation, because I haven't
Please.
paid a ton of attention to this, but
Okay.
Rudy purchased a stake in an existing grading company, correct?
Right. Correct.
Was it a majority stake or was it just a partial stake?
I think he joked, of course, with the 69%, but it was more than 50%. Yeah.
Okay, so he's the majority
Yeah.
shareholder of the company. And what company was it?
I don't remember. I was trying to remember off the top of my head just now, and I could not remember.
See, I don't remember either, and I guess that would
Yeah.
sum up my contribution to the conversation is if I'm not aware of what it is, I don't feel like it's a legitimate threat to the big contenders at this point. Having said that, Rudy is a very engaging personality, especially
Yeah.
within the Magic community. I know he dabbles in Pokemon and some of the other ones. Flesh and Blood is one that comes to mind.
Magic. Yeah.
Yeah, Magic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't Magic what I said first? If I didn't, that's what I meant to
Pokemon.
say.
Okay. Okay.
But obviously Magic. But I don't know. I guess there's just so much infrastructure and personnel and systems in place for those large grading companies that I doubt that there'll be any fringe companies that usurp
For
them
a
or
while.
come on
Yeah.
equal footing. If one were to, I would think it would be something that uses the machine learning. I think is it AGS that has the
Yeah. AI built
automatic,
in.
yeah, the AI grading?
Yeah.
Something like that, I could see being like a desirable way to circumvent some of the subjectivity that comes into grading. But they're running into the same problems where it's how do you legitimize yourself when you're playing against giants?
Yeah, and we won't go into the AI stuff, but I did a lot of AI work in my career field, and mapping these models, these AI models, around some of the differences in these cards. You're always going to have a human tweaking that model, trying to adjust it. The idea of having a zero touch and 100% accuracy is just not there.
Yeah.
There's always going to be like an assisted AI type approach, if anything else. Hey, the Green Shiz, good to see you, buddy. Glad you made it, man. Appreciate it. All right. Well, last but not least on this is going to be you mentioned it a little bit already, but we talked about it as well with Ryan at Pika Pika Papa. Having good, number two competition out there in the grading landscape is going to be something that we need as a collectible industry across everything, Pokemon sports, you name it. Who do you think might be the next, competitor coming up with PSA? Obviously, PSA is just miles above everybody else at the moment. Do you see CGC being that next one, or do you see somebody else?
Yeah, at least in the trading card game space. I don't know if CGC has the same reach in sports. I wouldn't assume so. I'm just assuming this is, like I said, an assumption, but that since CGC is so well established with video games and with comic books, that it would
Comics, yeah.
naturally appeal to those types of collectors. And I think they're doing a lot of things well. There are some things that I'm openly critical about with CGC,
Hmm.
and I hope that's not the message that people have taken away with from my videos, because I have gotten some flack from people in comments who are like, "You just hate CGC and you're a shill for PSA," and I'm like, "No, a PSA collector. That's what I started collecting. That's what I do. But I'm willing to acknowledge things that competitors do well. And I think it's good that we have meaningful competition in any
Agreed.
industry. You want that. You want to have a
Exactly.
competitor that forces prices down, that
Mhm.
hopefully propel customer service forward, where I guess we could argue that that's not necessarily the case in the grading world, but maybe it will be as economic pressures are placed on companies and they need to figure out how to maximize their customer loyalty. Um, but I would say that CGC, at least for Pokemon, would be my guess as like the number 2
Number
competitor.
2.
Um, Obviously, BGS is always going to be in the mix since they are such a widely known company, especially in the
Mhm.
sports world.
Sports, yeah.
And then is it SGC that is often on the like grading list of one of the companies
Yeah.
that's carrying a decent amount of market share? I
Yeah,
will say
when
too,
they
like I've
go ahead,
never
sorry.
handled an SGC card, but I think their slabs look really nice too.
Yeah, no, the one I have, I think I have one here, but no, it's AGM. No, SGC, I haven't held that one either. But yeah, when you see those on the reports and the graphs, those are typically the 3 or 4 that they have below PSA. And I'll echo a little bit of what Ryan said when I spoke to him about it. Beckett, I had Beckett magazines growing up for the sports cards. That's what we would go to check our prices with. I still
Yeah.
have them actually. And I just loved. I mean, especially got the one with Michael Jordan kissing the trophy and a few others. I love those covers. But if they could reposition themselves like they used to be in the '90s for sports, for whether it be Pokemon or Magic, whatever the case it is, then I think they could really set themselves straight. But I don't know. I'm not sure how much they're really focused on it. We'll have to see how the future unfolds.
Yeah, I think the window of opportunity for BGS has passed to
Yeah,
capitalize on that market. And maybe they don't even care. Like they do so much volume in sports and have so much credibility in that
perhaps.
world
Yeah,
anyway that it makes more sense. And there's so much more money flowing through sports cards anyway, where
very
I
true.
guess a lot of companies wanted to jump on to the Pokemon bandwagon here since it was
Hype train.
producing really well, but still, even at the peak, is just a small fraction of what the sports card community can bring in.
We have a comment here from Chaos on this topic. I'm new to grading, but I really like Beckett. The slabs feel quality, and I feel like the cards are well protected in the slab. Yeah, I haven't held one in so many years, and when I
I
did, it was sports. Yeah,
I agree with all that. It's a very robust slab and it looks good. It definitely feels sturdy. I have nothing wrong with them. It's just I think they missed their opportunity to gain the necessary market share and to make like actual set collectors. Part of it is the grading scale. They've tried to change grading scales a couple of times, and I think
backfires.
subgrades are really nice, but as we've seen with CGC too, it's something that is divisive for people because they're just looking for that one underlying number, not necessarily caring about all the individual components that go into that. So I think that can be a turn on for a certain type of collectors, but a turn off for the vast majority.
I agree with you on that one for sure. We got another fellow Minnesota. Sell the hat. The hat's a dead giveaway. It's a dead giveaway. See, we talked about it already. He actually goes hunting right before every podcast and recording, and then he comes straight back in here, and then he sits down in front of the camera. So that's
Yep.
why he's always got the hat on.
Had to wrestle a grizzly bear today.
All right, Matt. Well, let's jump over to some of the content creation. I want to talk through this with you in terms of what you actually do on some of this, because I think myself included have a lot to learn. And you're one of the people that we look to and say, this is great quality. I like how he does transitions, the intros. You just do a really good job. So, um, first of all, kudos. I think you're well known in the space for having some of the best quality videos in the Pokemon area, and we look to that and we recognize when we see one of your videos. Tell us about your creation process. What is that like for you? Do you script everything? Are you really building a storyline? How does it kind of start for you, and how do you move through the process?
It varies with the type of video. Some
Okay,
videos I can just like put slides to and I just go teacher mode and just talk through the slides like I would be in front of a classroom. Those are probably my favorite type to put together because they don't require as intensive of scripting. And then in terms of the B-roll, there's maybe some like secondary footage or pictures that I edit in, but then a lot of it is just like the slides being that visual reference. Videos that are more story driven, like the one where I was on the motorcycle trip
right.
or even like the monthly news videos that I do require a lot of pre-planning to the point where I'll often like script out word for word what I'm going
Mm.
to use because I want to make sure I get all the information right. And then I have a camera that's set up with a teleprompter, and so I can just kind of like look into that and at least hopefully still talking to the camera. I'm a pretty socially awkward person and I have a hard time maintaining eye contact in real life the way it is. So having a teleprompter helps me with that substantially. But then other videos are a matter of like figure it out in the post-production side of things where I'll have a topic, I'll have some ideas, I'll talk through it, I'll edit it down to just the parts that I want to convey. Then it's all right, where do I find the necessary footage, the pictures, the different things to help
Okay.
visually convey the information that I'm trying to show. So it kind of
Okay.
depends, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, and I found myself doing some of the same things depending on what I create. Because many times I'll have everything recorded just for me, what I'm going to show perhaps on my desk. But then as I'm editing, I'm thinking, well, I would like to insert like a small video clip here because that would be a nice transition to break things up a little bit. And so then you start to have these ideas as you're going through the editing process, and it kind of unfolds. You're like, oh, now I got to go find all this media.
Yep. And
Yeah,
sometimes it almost brings you back to square one where you almost want to like remake the
just
entire
start over.
video because
Just
you're like,
start.
oh, now I know how I'm going to make this.
Exactly.
Let
I
me
should have said it this
re-record it.
way.
Yeah.
Exactly. And especially if you're doing something like opening something like a box or a pack, it's like you can't do it again. It's like, well, I gotta use what I got. So,
Yeah.
all right.
Those are the types of videos that I have to be most intentional about are the ones that are the easiest to make. And there's probably nothing wrong with just flipping through some cards or opening some packs or doing something very traditional on YouTube. But I always feel like if I'm in that situation, I need to figure out a way to make it unique and different. And I always have this like false conception that if I make it interesting or do it in a way that nobody else has, people will watch it. This video will do so much better. It doesn't because it's out of my regular niche of videos, and so it doesn't get recommended with the algorithm. But then I at
Right.
least can look back on it and be like, "You know what? I made that video with all the skating in it, opening up packs, and I did that for me, not necessarily for everybody else." But,
Right.
that's just one of the realities of when you make more, like, educational style content. The stuff that deviates away from that traditionally doesn't do well, even if it happens to be really well made or really interesting.
That's a really good segue for just a second because I do have a bunch of stuff I want to go through on your content creation. But what have you learned about the YouTube algorithm, and how do you navigate it for your channel?
Not nearly as much as someone in my position should have. I think part of my love-hate relationship with it is I don't want to be just a small
Mm.
niche of content where it's like all just one style of video.
Right.
It would probably do better if that were my approach. Also, turning out more content more quickly would also
Yeah.
help with that. But I guess that's the trade-off I'm willing to make is ultimately I wanna make the videos that I wanna make, and I wanna have fun in the process, and I wanna approach the hobby in a lot of different ways. I don't want it to just all be business-related content or all just collection-related content or just pack opening content. And so I think that works against me in some ways. Having said that, there are certain things that perform much better, and, maybe there's some learning that's there as well in terms of, like, thumbnail design, um, titles and tags, making those line up well, reusing elements of previous existing titles of videos that
Mm.
have been successful. If you can like repurpose a similar title so it seems like it's part of a series, that's
Right.
something that kind of surprised me because I thought like if you title something exactly the same or really close to something you've titled earlier, it would like confuse it and not know which one to recommend. But that shows YouTube algorithm like a piece of consistency, and if something did really well
Mm.
and you do produce something similar, then it'll send that out to more people. So I think that's why some types of videos have done better than others. My monthly news videos tend to do the best,
Mm.
and maybe that's why it follows a similar structure, similar format, just new information each month.
Okay. I've funny. I've had the same conversation with my wife recently, and I said, I struggle because I want to do different things on the channel. I want to do podcasts. I want to do some openings and some free giveaways. I want to do some product reviews. Whatever the case may be, it's just like 'cause that's how I interact with the hobby. And there's still areas I haven't been able to get to yet. TCG game and building decks and stuff like that. But man, YouTube punishes you for that.
And if you look at some of the really successful channels in non-traditional Pokemon niches, like I don't know if you're familiar with Tricky Jim.
Yeah, oh,
Tricky
I love
Jim
Tricky
does like
Gym.
all the
Yeah,
deck
yeah, good
building
stuff.
videos and
Yeah.
amazing quality. You look at
Yes,
somebody
kills
like
it.
Ruby Retro. who does
Hmm.
like the historical videos, and they're all voiceover. But every single one, even though it's like one upload every few months, we're talking like 40,000 to 100,000 views. They're really well made, really well edited, but you know exactly what you're going to get. You're going to get a walk through history with that type of
Hmm.
content. So I think there is a benefit to making like a specific niche
Yeah.
that's yours and adhering to it. But I don't know, that's just never been my
Right.
style in life. I like to do
Yeah.
things
Do it your
differently that
way.
I wanna do.
No, exactly. Do it the way you enjoy it. It's experience, right? It's the experience.
Exactly.
Uh, Tell me, and I know this is gonna be a hard question to answer, but on average, how much time do you tend to spend, editing your videos? We joke 20 hours, but I mean, is it really 20?
Yeah, I would say most are around 10 hours, and then some
Okay.
will go up to, like, 30.
Wow. Okay.
And that's
All
including
right.
the whole process. That's, like, the recording, the scripting, the
Right.
filming, the actual editing. There are times when, like, I just can't speak eloquently or get the points out that I wanna get, and I'm like, "You know what? I've been trying to film this
Take a
video
break.
for
Yeah.
3 hours. I'm gonna take a break. I'm gonna script it
Okay.
out, and we'll try again, and we'll start all over." So,
Yeah.
um, I don't know, I'm a little bit more of a perfectionist on how my content comes across, especially in terms of the talking pieces. Like, I want the pacing to be
Yeah.
good and not talk too much, and that's a tendency I tend to have as a teacher. I'm probably doing it right now throughout this whole podcast,
No.
but
No.
when you're a teacher and you're working with high school kids, that's just a reality is you end up giving way too much information and talking too much, so
Not at all in the podcast. We're enjoying it, man. We're enjoying it. And to be fair, I'm kind of prompting you. So, and if you didn't respond, it would just be kind of me talking in silence. It'd be weird. Um, do you see yourself using other types of software? I know you're very much Windows based. I think you mentioned the editing software that you use in one of your last videos, but I forget the name of it.
I
What
use
was it?
Vegas. It
Vegas.
used to
Okay.
be Sony Vegas back in the day, and then a company called Magix bought it out, but it's essentially the same thing. It's
Okay.
one of the larger editing softwares out there.
And you started that because you use Sony cameras or just unrelated?
Pretty much unrelated. When I started doing
Okay.
editing on a fairly professional level was probably about 2008, 2009, and at the time, it was, like, either Final Cut if you had a Mac or Vegas
Right.
or I don't even know if Adobe had a competitor at that point or not. They may have, but there wasn't a lot
I'm
of
not sure.
options for, like, professional tier editing software.
Yeah, I do like Final Cut Pro, but it's a lot. I mean, like anytime you start with the basic stuff and you start want to do more and more advanced things, and it takes you to that advanced software, it just opens up the whole world. But once you get used to it, it's not too bad at all. Not too bad.
Well, the thing is, every editing software is essentially the same to begin with.
Hmm.
It is a learning curve going from one to the next because you have to figure out, like, where are the
Shortcuts.
shortcuts?
Yeah.
Where is the control to do the same exact thing? And so the
Right.
speed and the productivity substantially lowers as you just figure out the transference of taking those same skills and applying them to a new software, even though it's the exact same thing.
Yeah. Timeline, cut. Insert. You got material or media, and you dropping it in. You got preview. I mean, it's pretty much the basics there. One of the things I was thinking of as you were mentioning your previous kind of, I'm just mumbling and restarting, and maybe I'm not articulating myself very clearly. Is have you ever thought about doing a bloopers reel?
I have not. I should, but, I haven't. I'm so
That would
excited,
be
like, when I
hilarious.
finally get the video done and posted that the last thing I wanna do is scrub through all the footage again and, like, rearrange it.
Find all your mistakes that you were so upset about. Yeah. Yeah, I've thought about it before. My wife mentioned it one time. She heard me in here just laughing because I was trying to, get some random sentence out, and I tried like 5 times, and I just laughed at myself. And I said, "Well, whatever." And she goes, "You should do a bloopers reel." I said, "Yeah, maybe one day." But I think I'm with you. Going back and finding those bloopers now would be a lot of work. But maybe, maybe.
Well, in my situation, it'd be, like, 12-minute normal video and then, like, 50-minute blooper reel. I give all of the credit in the world
Uh,
to those that do, like, a one-take, 10-minute continuous
mm,
talking video.
yeah,
I don't know how people are able to do that effectively and still make articulated points and be able to go into some detail and infuse an element of humor into those videos. You'd think I'd be better at that as a teacher, and I guess I am when it's something that I've taught before, and part of it too is,
you
like, an
know better.
audience. If I'm in front of, like, a room full of people or even, like, an entire auditorium, I'm a lot more eloquent than when I'm in a room looking into a camera talking to myself.
or at least we think we are, right? But when
I
I'm
would
giving
hope so, yeah.
when I'm giving presentations, I think the same thing of myself at work. But then I get here, I'm like, "Oh, maybe I'm not as good as I think I was. Maybe that
Well,
didn't
my
go
students
so
always
well."
say that I'm funny, but they might just mean that I'm funny looking and just didn't specify. That is something that Gen Z likes to do is abbreviate words.
Yeah, we'll leave that one for somebody else to decide. But I think I'm in the same boat as you, Matt. Same boat as you, buddy. Um, One of the things I was curious about, because I've seen again your content since the beginning, in terms of going back and rewatching a lot of your old stuff, and I'm curious as to what your goal is for the channel. What is it you want to do next? Where are you looking to go? Do you have any specific topics you want to try to achieve?
Um, have fun and enjoy it is really my ultimate goal. I mean,
Okay.
I'd like to see my channel grow. I'd like to have a ton of influence within the hobby and hopefully wield that influence with a positive, productive spin to it and make people feel welcomed and more engaged and give them the education since that's my primary goal in life as an educator is to provide education. There are drawbacks with that though, like running a full-time channel, I can't imagine how somebody like Rev does it or even some of
Mm,
the smaller but still on that tier guys like PokeVault or somebody like I don't know, you name it. Those guys are doing probably more than a full-time job just on content and I don't know how I would manage that and if that's a bridge that I would want to cross. Obviously, if the opportunity would be there and it could like fully be self-sustaining and funding, it'd be tempting, but I wouldn't want to step away from the classroom entirely either. So
right.
there's conflicting emotions involved. So for now, we'll just let it be what it is. I'm going to keep making the content that I want to make, having fun with it, and if people enjoy it, that's just extra validation and reward. And there is a little bit of narcissism and if being appreciated that I'm not going to pretend like I don't enjoy, but ultimately that's also not the ultimate goal. So
Right.
whatever. I mean, we'll just
Have
enjoy
fun.
it. Yeah.
Have fun. You bring up a good point because their success in some part, obviously not all, but they finally let go of the reins to allow the editing to be done outside of themselves. Do you think you could ever let somebody else edit your videos?
They'd have to watch through all my bloopers, and I'd be way too self-conscious for that. No, that's the part that I enjoy the most,
Yeah.
like, I joked about it earlier that the 20 hours of editing, which may or may not be a little bit exaggerated, but about it being a grind, and it is, but the creation process is where I get some of that creative fulfillment, and I've been
Mm,
an editor for videos before I was making YouTube videos. I did videos freelance for, like, sports teams. I coached
mm.
wrestling, and so we do, like, the end of season
Oh,
highlight
okay.
videos and other stuff like that. So I always felt like doing video editing and filming stuff was something that I enjoyed. If I took away the creative process, I feel like that would remove part of what gives this meaning.
Yeah, as I said to you before on the same topic, there's a sense of fulfillment there as you're editing and you get that out, and it's your masterpiece. That moment now it's out there, and you've crafted it and molded it in such a way that now gets to hopefully be enjoyed by many. And to lose that, it would definitely lose a piece of the process for sure. Yeah, I would agree with you. Good. I'm sorry. You're gonna say something?
No,
No.
I was gonna ask if we could respond to the Pole Father.
Sure. What we got here? I see classic implementing Lord of the Flies culture in the classroom.
So I've read Lord of the Flies, and this is a little bit backhanded, man. But in all seriousness, I actually teach Lord of the Flies in my sophomore classes. I've been teaching it for 13 years now, and absolutely love that book. There's so much that's going on with it that's symbolic and thematic, very relevant to the real world. And I could tell some fun stories about my classroom being like Lord of the Flies. For example, the day when we first introduce it and I leave the students in the classroom alone to organize things and to accomplish some tasks together and then intentionally sabotage them and take some observation notes when everything breaks down and all the chaos and the order starts befalling and people blame each other and are worried about their grades. And then I can use those notes and those photos later on in the unit and remind people that these psychological elements relate to all of us. At any given time, we could be the less desirable characters of the book. So there you go. That's your Lord of the Flies.
You said a high school English teacher. That's the first thing that came to mind.
Well, that's what we're doing. It's my favorite unit to teach,
Yeah.
actually.
Hey, Boondock. Thanks for joining. Appreciate it, buddy. Yep. Late night live for us. We were just talking about how us we're early birds, and this is late for us. So appreciate you guys tuning in. Much appreciated. Well, we'll switch it over to some topics on the market for just a minute before we start to wind down. And again, Matt and everybody here, thank you so much for your time, man. It's been a blast so far, and I hope everybody is enjoying the conversation. I know I am.
Yeah, these are always
Uh, yeah, I love the podcast. It's one of my favorite things. And that's what I was mentioning. My wife. I said it's one thing. If I'm going to cut anything out of the channel, it won't be the podcast. I really, really enjoy just having that conversation with people. I was wanting to talk to you a little bit about the market. We mentioned it a little bit earlier today, just early in the conversation, I should say, and we just touched it a little bit. But I want to see, in your opinion, where do you see things going? We obviously had the hype at the boom. We've now calmed down a little bit. You did already mention that you see some additional downturn coming just because of the market situations, economic situations. Um, but when you think about that in terms of Pokemon specifically, how do you see it now over the next year or so?
yeah, well,
In terms,
for
I'm sorry.
those of you that have been around for a while, if you remember the cycle around 2016 and going into 2017, Pokemon Go had just come out. Pokemon was all over the world, and prices for everything exploded. Not nearly to the extent percentage wise as what we saw in 2020. I think that was a major outlier, perhaps the likes of which we will never see again. But 2016 was a pretty close situation. And in 2017, things cratered comparatively. They didn't fall quite to the lower points of prior to 2016, but
Right.
almost back to where they were before. And I feel like we're watching that same exact pattern play out, not just in terms of prices, but also in some of the other supply and demand dynamics, where you saw a massive rush of grading where people realized that like slabbed cards could be profitable. And so then there was this race to buy graded cards and to buy inventory off eBay to grade. And then a massive saturation that followed immediately after that. And then all the cards hitting the market at the same time as people were trying to liquidate those collections and try to
Right.
capitalize on something and see some sort of return on those fees that they had amassed through that mass grading process. And I think we're seeing that same type of cycle right now on steroids, where there are a lot of slabs entering the market. There's a lot of modern product entering the market. Everybody was in this investor flipper mentality. And so people are perhaps looking to liquidate that as quickly as possible. And I've never seen so much graded product on the market all at once. And I don't know whether or not the market will absorb it all like it did in 2017. But when prices reached a low enough point, a lot of people bought up that stuff. And then that's what set up the slow, casual gain over time in 2018 and 2019 that was interrupted by 2020. Because by 2018, prices hadn't gotten to that same peak in 2016 yet, but it was that gradual linear growth that we had previously seen. I think that's a healthier growth, and that's what I would
Right.
expect to see in the long term. So I think we're currently in a state of saturation from just all that stuff hitting the market at the same time, all the competition between these different uh, grading services, all the different selling platforms, and we have more than ever now. You've got Whatnot, you've got other
Hmm.
sites. TikTok is doing cards now. You have multiple different auction platforms, eBay, TCG Player, you
eBay
name it.
Live. Yep.
And so it's just a matter of what's going to get absorbed and what items have enough rarity and scarcity to the point where people will buy them up and then they'll just cease to exist out there. I think there's legitimately things that are so plentiful that maybe they'll just always be on the market and there'll always be so much competition that prices will just stabilize at their lows and just kind of sit there. But I
Hmm.
do think there's also items that will become scarce and will eventually return to that same linear growth. That's my overall take.
Do you see the division of the scarcity happening probably between modern and vintage? Is that where you start to draw the line somewhere fuzzy through that series of releases of sets, or how
I
do
mean,
you differentiate?
that's easy for me to differentiate since I'm a vintage collector, but I don't think it applies in that black and white of a dichotomy. When
Okay.
it comes to modern, even with modern, there are certain items that aren't as plentiful as others, and there are certain things that have a lot more popularity and desirability. And you could
Mm,
take certain things like certain sealed products that will become more scarce over time, whether people are buying them simply for the sake of opening or capitalizing on some of those rare items that could potentially be inside. So having that gambling component to it, those are all things that are desirable. People like opening cards. So I do think there's going to be a number of things that, like I said, don't have any of those fundamentals, and those will ultimately be the ones that are left behind and perhaps never
I see.
actually regain any ground. And that applies to vintage too. There's plenty of vintage items that aren't particularly
Right.
popular. They don't have scarcity. They don't have rarity on their side. And so I think what I would look for are things that have the 5 main fundamentals.
Okay. And when you think of this in terms of the present moment, are you seeing impacts in how you interact in the hobby? Are you seeing, for example, less sales on your store, drops in prices? Like, what's the impact from your perspective in day to day?
Yeah, I typically move my prices with the market. So I've been dropping prices ever since 2021 and just progressively and periodically. Some things are listed higher than what current market value is. And sometimes I've had people send me a message and be like, hey, I'm really looking for this item. Can you do this price? And I'll be like, no, I'd rather keep it at that price. But I found one other one that's on eBay and I can shoot you a link to it. And, sometimes people really appreciate that. And they're like, why would you do that as a seller? Aren't you trying to sell us? And I'm like, well, I have my limit. And so to answer your question, I think that's part of it is my interaction with the market is
Mm,
much more in a I'd rather hold certain items now in anticipation of prices improving. And then in some
right.
cases, I'm being much more diligent about watching auctions and watching listings where that buyer mentality is returning much more strongly than it would have been around in 2020, 2021.
Okay. And I think that speaks really well to the point of not being in a position to be forced to sell. Because you won't be able to
Yeah,
make those kind of decisions if you're in a cash crunch situation. You spend all your funds, credit card bills due, you're about to have interest, and you got to buy groceries. Like if you're in a position where you're crunched, then you can't have that kind of decision making.
exactly. And perhaps that's one of the financial benefits of maintaining a regular 9 to 5 style job.
Right.
And I guess one of the other like benefits of being a teacher is having summers off where then I can devote more time and attention specifically to buying and selling and collecting. Um, but yeah, not being in that position where you have to move
Right.
inventory and constantly cycle it out so quickly does provide that element of flexibility.
Yeah, I had that same conversation just yesterday. Because there's some things that I've priced very intentionally. That I don't care if I sell it now or in a year. It's okay. But there's other things that I just haven't got around to updating yet. And if somebody messaged me on those and oh yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't realize the market dropped, 5%. Yeah, sure, happy to accept the offer. But many times it's
Absolutely.
it's a very intentional price. Yeah.
And I have best offer usually listed on every item that I have listed.
Mm,
It's just oftentimes my best offer that I'm willing to accept will be higher than market value for items that I know I'm not going to be able to replace easily. And so
right.
those are the ones that I'm looking at as like, well, this isn't like the rarest card out there, but there's not a lot of them and it's not something I'm going to find in the wild very easily. So I'd rather
Right.
just hang on to it and see where that goes versus other ones where if it's something I have 20 copies of, I'm going to be a little bit more lenient with where I sell it. And yeah, I'll meet you at market
Agreed.
value or maybe even take a little bit less.
Right. Yeah, and it goes back to, and I don't know how detailed you do it, but many times I'll look at collection buyouts, and in a sense, I price the cards I'm grading and the cards I'm selling at a in a way that I'm not losing everything. And obviously, when you do those types of things, you're trying to, especially if you grade a few, trying to make a few that will help you pay for the collection, help you pay for what you purchased, add a few in, but then sell the rest, and then not doing that at a loss, obviously, so you don't undo the
Yeah.
efforts you did to buy it in the first place. So that's a bit of a balance act. I think it's hard
Um,
because you get thousands of cards and they get mixed together and say, okay, was this one the one from that collection, and can I sell that at 10% less or not? Yeah, it gets complicated in the masses.
Yeah, and I guess that was always the goal of doing a collection purchase is you look at those numbers, you calculate the best case and worst case scenarios, and the hope is that you can get some of the cards that you need, add them to the collection, sell the extras to pay for the collection, and then
Exactly.
kind of break even in that way, but expand your own personal collection. Maybe
Exactly.
even make a little bit of profit if you get lucky,
Yeah.
or maybe add some items to your collection and take a little bit of loss on the overall collection, but then you got those collection pieces at a discount rate.
Hmm.
That was a lot easier to do back then. Where now a lot of the eBay listings that I look at, it's people that are so willing to speculate that they're thinking like not only best case scenario on how cards grade, but they're offering prices where it's like grand slam prices like, okay, if every one of these cards grades a
It'd be
10,
10.
you can make $5 and like It's a dangerous way to go about buying a collection if you're looking to flip.
And maybe I'm somewhat biased in this, but I think I see that a lot more in the vintage. They definitely have the prices quite high, but I also see it in modern too. But I see a lot more of that when you have really good vintage cards and somebody knows they have some good vintage cards. Yeah, they price them really high. So okay, well, no thanks.
Yeah.
No thanks.
And there's a danger in like always only assuming the best case scenario because at
Yeah.
that point it just becomes more of a gamble than it is a calculated risk.
And just a quick little poke on that, actually. Do you allow yourself to always drop a grade and still be in a safe place financially? Do you give what's the buffer you give yourself?
Like with cards that I submit to grading.
Right. You say, hey, if this got I want a 9, but if it got an 8, I'm still okay. Or do you not even send those in?
Yeah, usually like for a submission as a whole. There are individual items where like if it graded one grade lower, like maybe I'm anticipating a 9 and it gets an 8, maybe I lose on it or maybe I break even at best.
Okay.
And that's
Okay.
just the way it's always been, even way back in the day when you take any card, PSA 9 or sorry, PSA 8 for like any of the first edition holographics from vintage, you might get $20 for it. Grading fee at the time was like $8. So it's like, all right, there's $12 margin there if it gets an 8. And, maybe you bought the card for $18 or maybe even $12 if it was part of a set. And you go, well, I
Right.
broke even, but I graded a bunch of 9s too, and I got a couple of 10s. So that's where
Right.
the
Okay.
offsetting profit was.
Look at the masses and try to balance it out. Okay.
Yeah.
Looking back at the market for a second, there was a comment, and this won't be verbatim for your words, so it's just a loose speaking to that. But and I actually left a comment on that video, and I didn't look back to see if you had replied, but you made a statement around market saturation, and kind of as you did today a little bit as well. And my thought on looking at that is I'm curious to see how do you determine or at least try to differentiate between the difference between the market being saturated and the oversupply of product, and where do you determine, say, well, this is the market's full, they don't want to buy anymore, or there's just that much more product and they're still buying as much or more, and what metrics do you use to determine that?
Let me see if I have the question correct. It's about where to determine when the amount of product on the market is saturated without demand to actually absorb all of the product, or the demand's not there and it's saturated in that way.
Yeah, determining between the two of the market saturated or we have oversupply.
I guess I would say those are synonymous.
Okay.
If the market is oversaturated with something, I would say that that is the supply is outweighing the demand for it, and thus the saturation, where there's more that's out there that's not being absorbed, or if it is being absorbed, it's doing so with a lot less price pressure.
Yeah, and
Unless
maybe
maybe I'm
no,
misunderstanding one of those terms, but that's how I've always thought of.
no, not at all. And let me expand upon why I'm thinking about it this way. So if you have 1,000 people that are buying Pokemon cards today, and Pokemon's making 1,000 cards, everybody gets one. But now, if the same 1,000 people still are buying in year 2024, but Pokemon's making 10,000, now they may still have the same buying power in the market, but now we have more product that they are not going to consume. So is it really that they've bought everything that they want, or there's too much of that specific thing, and the things they're buying otherwise are going to be other things that they're not oversupplied?
Sure, I think I understand now.
Yeah.
I would just counter by saying, at least how I've always used the term of saturation isn't necessarily with the total amount of a given product that's available. It's more of like a relative to the amount of demand that exists. So when I say something is
Okay.
saturated, I mean like
Okay.
there's more of it than what demand is willing to consume.
I
Or if
see.
demand is
I
willing to
see.
consume it, they're only willing to do so at a lower price point. Or if something is readily available and continuously available on a sales platform and it's just always there, that is something that I would say is saturated.
Okay. I see your point. Okay. That's a good clarification because I was curious to how you determine between the two, but I think I understand now. All right. Well, that'll move us into some rapid fire questions. So we'll run through these, and the way we've done these is, try to answer them in a short, couple of words if you can. But if you feel like it needs a tangent and you want to give a story behind it, I'm okay with that too. So
I'll do my best not to.
that's okay. That's what we're here for. All right, here we go. So, which PokeTuber do you watch the most?
Uh, there's like 5 or 6 that I watch like every episode of. I don't have a good answer to that. All of them.
Okay.
Sorry.
I like it. One Pokemon card you wish you could have if there was no price that you don't have today. You weren't worried about the price.
I'll choose a weird one. There's a promotional card that was used at the Super Trainer Showdown as a decoration, and it's a
Hmm.
card cut out of a Team Rocket sheet, and it's printed on both sides, and it's like 4 cards on the front and 4 cards on the back. It's like a
Really?
miscut. Yeah, and I'm not exactly sure. I think it was a little bit smaller than a traditional card. There was one that was on auction a few months ago, and
Never seen it before.
yeah, I
Check it
have,
out.
like, the other items from the Super Trainer Showdown, including the shirt, so I would want that for display purposes just to kinda bring it all
Nice.
together.
Nice. I'll check that one out. I never heard that one before. Um, best Pokemon set ever created. So this is the question that we had earlier in the chat.
That would be Neo Destiny.
Neo Destiny.
Great
All
set.
right.
Has the Shinings, it has dark Pokemon, light Pokemon.
Uh, Was that the? No, it wasn't. But it was around the time that Nick, old school Pokemon, got the Team Rocket, and he's like, "What is this dark Pokemon stuff? I don't like this." And he walked away from Pokemon for a while. It
Yeah, that
reminded
was
me
the
of that.
first emergence of the dark Pokemon was the
Mm,
Team Rocket set.
yeah. Okay, that's what it was. Um, one thing Pokemon could do better.
What would I have Pokemon do better? I think they need to do a better job with the promo distributions that they do, especially for events like
Mm,
the Van Gogh one I thought was a really cool idea, and the fact that the majority of the promos were distributed through the Pokemon Center rather than having the actual museum walkthrough, which would have been a great educational experience and would have been so much better
mm,
than just getting the card in isolation. I think they need more of that, especially here in the United States, where it actually gets people some cultural sophistication.
nice, nice. I like that. Good answer. Your best Pokemon. The best Pokemon.
The best one overall?
Hmm.
Is this interchangeable with favorite or like the best at battling?
Best at battling.
Um, if we go through the card game and some of the sets, one that I really enjoyed using in decks was Rocket Zapdos. I had a Rocket
Mm,
Zapdos deck that was very fun to play.
nice, nice. Favorite drink.
Probably Mountain Dew.
Okay.
Hot
We'll
chocolate
throw.
is really good in the winter.
Yeah, when that snow comes in, you might switch it over to hot chocolate, right?
Yep. Maybe mix them together. We'll pour some Mountain Dew in.
We got
That's a
one from
joke.
Ryan. We'll insert favorite tag team card. You probably don't have one, do you?
I'm vaguely familiar with some. There was a Gengar
Okay.
one with, was it Mimikyu?
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a nice one. Yeah,
I'll go with that one.
I like it. All right. Biggest mistake you've made this year.
I don't know, Pokemon wise,
No,
otherwise.
anything. Yeah, anything.
I don't know, I'm gonna pass on that one.
Okay.
I'll come back to that.
Favorite modern set, if you have one.
Oh, it's 151.
All right.
It's all the classics, and the classics never go out of style.
I was waiting for the line. You hadn't
Yeah,
dropped it yet, man. Okay, perfect.
set me up
Uh,
perfectly.
I like that. We planned that before.
Yeah, you get an
Don't
assist. You'll go
don't
down in the
don't
stats.
don't forget that Dan scripts all of my podcasts, so don't worry. Guilty pleasure.
I watch a lot of YouTube videos, and one of the things that I really like doing is watching, like, classic Simpsons highlight videos on YouTube, where I just love The Simpsons growing up so much, and I was so disheartened by the downturn in the quality of The Simpsons that every once in a while, I just have to bring it back to the earlier
I
ones.
gotcha. I remember my first time. A small tangent here. My first time watching The Simpsons. We had one of those big, box tube TVs with like 4 dials, right? And it came on, Fox, whatever, at the time. And he said, "Eat my shorts," right? He dropped a line, and my mom's like, "What is that?" She was in the other room. It's like, "Nothing. It's this new cartoon I'm watching." She goes, "You can't watch that." I'm like, "Oh."
That's the line that did it for her? Eat
Yep,
my
eat my
shorts?
shorts. Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah, at the time they weren't quite as rough as they got to in the older years. I started watching again as I got older. Worst moment in Pokemon ever.
For me or for like the hobby?
The hobby.
Probably the lack of available product and the rampant scalping that was happening in 2020, where
Mm,
I've always felt like the kids are the lifeblood of the hobby, and if they're not there, the whole thing dies. And I want people to have a good experience, and I think for a lot of people that was not a good experience.
fair point. A trait of yours that you would trade for another one that you don't like, perhaps one that you would like to trade for one that you maybe like better.
Is this like a theoretical trade or a trade that I've actually done?
A personal trait.
Oh, a personal trait. I'm sorry. I thought you
Yeah,
said trade. I was
no,
like thinking, "Ooh, I get the opportunity to trade for whatever I want." So it's a trait that I would like to have that I don't.
right.
Okay. I love numbers. We mentioned that earlier, but I am not very good with spreadsheets. Like I can do
Hmm.
the basics and navigate around, but I've seen what Dan and some others can do with spreadsheets and it's like magic. And I wish I had that. So I don't know if
Hmm.
that counts as more of a skill than a trait, but
We'll take it. We'll take it.
that's gonna be it.
All right. Uh, now we'll transition that quite well because now we're going to ask you what would be your superhero power if you can pick one.
Well, PK told me I was Spider-Man in one of his videos, so that would be
I
pretty
saw
cool.
that.
As a skater, though, I always thought that having the healing powers of Wolverine would be the best
Mm,
case scenario because I would still have to have the fear of getting hurt to do tricks and still
and it
have
would
to, like,
still hurt
earn
temporarily.
the
Yeah.
learning experience, but then also just not having the recovery of, like, tearing an MCL is something that happened, and it took, like, 2 years to recover from that, so, I want the healing powers.
All right. I like Wolverine's one of my favorites. Good one. Which transitions almost like we set this up on purpose. Best rollerblades ever made.
Razors, Razor Skate Company.
We're gonna have a problem. Mine was K2 Fatties.
Ooh, okay. Rollerblade, the brand, is a Minnesota brand, and the
uh,
owner of Rollerblade has been at a few of our events in the past, so that's always cool.
okay. All right. Nice. Nice.
Olsen brothers.
I've been out of it for many years, but I was a rollerblader too. Let's jump into the personal side now. So, one of the things that I look at when I see a lot of people that's been in the hobby for a long time, and obviously as a positive influence such as yourself, who do you look up to? Who do you admire in the hobby, and why? So I'm curious who inspires you.
There's a lot of people that I would put into that category. From a business standpoint, Dan and Nick are two of my favorite people to interact with. I really like hanging out with, PK. Um Peeked at you. We walked together through downtown Denver when we were both going to bed early, and he was my walking
Nice.
buddy, so I always appreciated that. We had some good conversations. Basically anybody that's around that's interested in having fun and just being a good influence for the hobby as a whole. And I think there are so many different people that fit that bill, that I almost feel guilty answering this question because I should be literally naming like a massive list. I should be Santa Claus here unfurling the list of people, and I'm sure I've forgot some.
No worries. I'm sure that all the love is still there, no matter what, right?
Absolutely.
Um, as we look at this, we're going through this journey in life. You're a teacher. You're obviously a content creator. You're enthusiast and love Pokemon and many other things in that list. How do you define success for yourself, Matt?
I did a video talking about self-actualization, and it's just the idea of doing something for the love of doing it, but also becoming the best version of yourself at what you're doing. So it's about that
Mm,
personal progression. And that's something I try to get out of everything that I do, whether it's skating and having old man status now where I don't recover as well. And it's more of just the ability to retain the existing tricks that I've learned rather than pushing into new territory. But even that's an accomplishment. For collecting, it's expanding the collection, expanding the influence, the experiences, interacting with other people, hopefully providing people with something that will make their experience of the hobby better. And that's what carries over into teaching as well, is again, hopefully leaving a mark and giving people something more positive to see in
I
themselves.
love it.
And uh, if I can do those things, I think that's the mark of success.
Well said, my friend. Well said. A quick hello to Shovels. Hey, Shovels. Old school. Good to see you guys. Thanks for stopping by. Some love from ladies as well on your reply there. Um, One of the other things I mentioned just a second ago was that I also rollerbladed. So I was in the aggressive rollerblading in my earlier years. We didn't have at the time, there was no skate parks around. We were doing it in the streets and getting in trouble and down the rails at the local banks or whatever the case may be and getting thrown out. It was a blast though. It was one way for us to kind of get out. We probably went a lot farther than we should have, but it was a way for us to get out and explore. We went out early too, like really, really early. Get up early in the morning as the sun's coming up and
That
just
doesn't
be out
sound like
all
any
day.
skaters I've ever interacted with. I always talk about rollerblade time where it's like 3 hours later. If people say they're meeting at 11, that means it's 2 PM.
No, we would pack our book bags and we would skate probably 30 miles out to different places. And then we wouldn't come home until night, and we would just stay out, have our bag full of snacks and all kinds of stuff, and it was just an absolute blast. But it was a way for us to get away, from the house, but get a good exercise and that fulfillment of trying new tricks, finding some new handrails to go down at the time, so a new set of stairs that gave a new kind of challenge. What got you into rollerblading, and what keeps you there?
Yeah, so originally I had some friends that skated, and our local town was building a skate park, and so we all became involved with
Nice.
designing the skate park.
Oh,
And so I
cool.
had a lot of influence on like what features were placed in, where they were located. And this is all coming from somebody that had never put on a pair of rollerblades at that point. I was just like, I didn't know what I was doing necessarily, but my friends did. And so that's what pulled me in.
Okay.
And like you described, done a ton of street skating and sliding on handrails and having people kick us off their property and police
Yeah.
officers kindly ask us to leave. And it was always my view that you be respectful and you're like,
Yeah.
sorry, we'll leave, no problem. Often that's not the attitude or the reputation
Mhm.
that a lot of skaters have, but that
Yeah.
was always how my local crew handled it. It's that feeling of personal progression though, because there's always something new to do, always something new to learn. You get that social dynamic from it where you're working through it with other people. And I think it's a really healthy thing for people to have
Mm,
that constant battle with fear where they're looking
mm.
over and anticipating doing something that's legitimately dangerous that actually should be feared, but pushing themselves through a calculated risk, knowing that they have the muscle memory to be successful. I'm not saying like jump off a roof because, you've got it. You might not, but if you've worked yourself to that point, where you can attack something that's really technical or something really dangerous, fall a bunch of times and continue to get up, and then eventually break through and succeed, that is the best feeling that I
Yeah,
can describe. And
it's amazing.
rollerblading has always been my primary passion. It's the only one that I would place even above collecting for those reasons. And that's what's kept me going. We still have a really
Okay.
tight group of people that I've been skating with for about 20, actually over 20 years now, and
Congrats,
keeps me
man.
young.
Yeah, it sure does. It sure does. I'll blame my back issues because I stopped rollerblading.
Yeah, I mean,
We'll
as
blame
soon
it.
as you stop, that's when the back issues and the knees issues
That's
and
right.
stuff catch up with you. Until
That's
you
right.
quit, though, you can like outrun it for a certain amount of time.
Well, let me know when it catches up to you. Well, I still got
It's
some years on you, I think.
it's trying to. It's trying to.
Looking more at the teaching side for you, it's as we said already several times, and we probably already covered some of this in depth. It's a very rewarding yet challenging job, and as I said, much appreciation, and respect to those willing to help us do the best to educate our upcoming generations. Um, what's been your approach in really being successful as a teacher? Because it's as you tied it back to your parents, in a sense of wanting to make sure you give out education to those that are to come, after you. How do you really set yourself up each year as you start a new school year and new students to really set yourself up for success and plan that journey because you're having an impact on these people probably for the rest of their lives.
And we'll backtrack just a little bit and say that I'm certainly not the favorite teacher of every student, and I don't want to be like overselling myself for the impact that I have. I'm sure to the vast majority of people, I'm just another one of the people up there that's telling them to do their homework and to study. Having said that, though, I do take a really intentional approach to how I go about teaching. I do consider it more than just my job. It's my
Yeah.
ultimate calling. It's what I feel like I'm meant to do. And I do get a lot of joy out of it, but there are certainly a number of things that are difficult and that I hate about the profession. Meetings, the amount of paperwork, the amount of overreach from administrators and from stuff like that. And I should even state that
Right.
we have great administrators where I teach. They're wonderful people. It's just part of the culture of teaching. Um, in terms of like, how do I go about it and what does my philosophy look like? I always say
Right.
that like education is a three-way intersection between content, curiosity, and relationships. You have to have the relationships in place. You have to be relatable to kids. I'm a fairly outgoing, nerdy individual that doesn't mind being self-deprecating at times, and I'm at least somewhat attuned to the cultural nuances of teenage culture. And even though when I intentionally get them wrong and, pronounce things incorrectly and incorporate teen slang that makes them cringe, that's something I will do every chance I get because that's part of how you build the relationships.
Uh,
In terms of content,
I
I
love
think
it.
that's where I excel over a lot of other
Right.
teachers is making things relevant and engaging. For example, we do a persuasive paper unit, and rather than just doing a traditional research paper, I spent hours and hours my first year teaching, setting up this elaborate, like, mock crime scene in the classroom and building this massive portfolio of imagined suspects and giving each one a name and a backstory and like fingerprints, footprints, a whole testimonial package of their alibis and stuff, and taught criminal justice through this unit and had people do like this really intensive thing that's gotten a lot of praise from some of our larger district level people and has been very successful in
Nice.
teaching writing in a way that a lot of students wouldn't be engaged with, and that has proven to be more resilient against cheating like Chat GPT. You can't just look it up and have it write it for you. So things like that have been a lot of intentional work versus just taking the pre-prescribed mandated curriculum directly out of the book and
Right.
going, all right, at the end of this reading, answer questions 2 through 5 and write 4 to 5 sentences about summary. So it's the content piece, the relationship piece, and then the curiosity. That
I
one
love it.
unit I mentioned does that, but a lot of other units as well, where there's that element of how do you make people want to get more information? How do you make it valuable to them? I'm known to gamify a lot of things in the classroom and make teams out of things and award points randomly for things or for good behavior or for performance on quizzes or whatever. And so there's a lot of I don't know, a lot of silliness that happens in my classroom, and that's part of what makes it fun, and as soon as those things get mandated away and we're told exactly what to teach and how to teach it, it'll probably stop being fun, and there is a drive in that direction
Mm.
culturally, and that's unfortunate, but fingers crossed that that doesn't quite permeate to where I'm at least not yet.
Well, hopefully, and I think that's perfect because I was going to ask you, do you plan, assuming that things stay on track and you're able to pursue education in the creative way that you do it, would you look to retire from this?
In some capacity, I think so. The
Okay.
relationships are great, and those can only thrive when all three of those intersections are working efficiently, though. As soon as you become the teacher that doesn't take an interest, that doesn't do anything more than just the minimum of here's your textbook curriculum, I'm just here
Mm.
as a supervisor, that's when the other pieces break down. So I don't know what that would look like, whether it'd be moving to a different area of education or even a different school or a different type of school. I'm not really sure. I'm hopeful it doesn't come to that because I really like my school community and I've been there for 13 years. So I'm well established and have a lot of
Right.
relationships that are already existing. Um, but yeah, there's certainly frustrations, and I'll say that over the pandemic, there were times when it was really close to being like, "That's enough. I cannot do
That's
my
it.
job effectively. What you're asking me to do is impossible, so I'm done." But
I'm going
you gotta
Pokemon full time.
yeah, you gotta look for, those brighter horizons
That's right.
on the horizon. Horizons on the horizon, that's well spoken
Right?
like an English teacher.
Perfect. You nailed it. You nailed it.
Yep.
Jax, thanks for stopping by, man. Looks like you had a couple of pass throughs in terms of getting to us, but we appreciate you spending some time with us, man. Much appreciated. And thanks, Rattle and the Green Shiz for helping us spread the love for the community and find new people. Really appreciate it.
It's the season to pay things forward, and we're just passing on all the viewers, so we appreciate you.
Yeah, much appreciated. We also have one on the topic of um, the best experience because You mentioned the bad ones. We don't have to go too much into those, and you kind of talked about the pandemic being one of them. But what's been one of the best moments for you in teaching? I'm sure there's many, much like people you look up to in the Pokemon community. But what's one of those moments that really just sticks with you since you've been a teacher?
Probably when like the most reluctant to learn students that traditionally don't do well find something to gravitate to and really latch on and become passionate,
Mm,
even if they still don't do well academically. And I see that happen more times than I can count, but where they're actually engaged and like appreciative of what's happening in the classroom. One that comes to mind was a student that was never around the first quarter that I had him in class. He was in my first hour and was just chronically so late to class that rarely made it at all. And student that was known to not do particularly well, but during one of our units as we were reading through the book at the end, he was like, "This is like the most interesting book I've sat through. I don't know the last time I've read a full book." And then he asked to come by after school and we talked about like all the underlying psychological things and how the progression, this was Lord of the Flies, but how the
okay.
progression of murders that are described in the book progress from like involuntary manslaughter up to then second degree murder and then eventually first degree murder,
Mm,
and how that's intentionally planned out. And he's like, I didn't realize like that there was that much intentionality behind it. And we ended up having like an hour-long conversation about a book. It wasn't for a grade. It wasn't something he was required to do. And it was just fun. Like as a teacher, you don't
right.
get that very often if somebody is seeking you out that is typically not in class at all and be like, can I come around and talk about this after? I have some ideas. Like, yeah, stop by.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that sincere interest, right, and wanting to learn and have that conversation, I think, is very key. And it goes back to your relationship point, right? So that student then, I'm sure, started to attend class a lot more frequently after that.
I hope so. We get kids that shift around all year. We are on a quarter system, and so every 9 weeks,
Mm,
it's an entirely new group of students that wind up in our classrooms,
okay.
which is
All right.
really tough on a relationship building standpoint because sometimes it'll be like 175 new names and faces to get to know over the
Oof.
course of 9 weeks.
Wow. Wow. Okay. I was hoping to get a little bit longer time frame with them, but it sounds like it's a
Well,
lot of revolving doors.
I should backtrack a little bit and say often many of them will be in more than 1 quarter. So it's not an
Mhm.
entirely new turnover, but, you
Okay.
know, from 1 quarter to another, there might be half of the students that are entirely new.
Wow. Okay. Well, Matt, we'll transition here to what will be the closing, and we'll end it with two questions for you. So the first one will be, what advice would you give somebody to maintain a healthy, long-lasting relationship in the hobby? Because I think that's what you've definitely crafted for yourself. I think you speak to a lot of those points in your content creation and some of the knowledge you try to share. What would that advice be to either somebody new or existing in the hobby to keep it long lasting and healthy?
Sure. I think I would offer a couple of points to consider anyway. And one would be to have defined goals and for the most part stick to those goals. Like you can deviate out, but if you're trying to do everything at once, it's going to be overwhelming really quickly. And it's
Mm,
going to feel like you're not necessarily making any progress or it might get really financially overwhelming. Along those lines, having patience. Rome isn't built in a day, and you're talking to a guy that's been collecting since 1999 and still hasn't accomplished his primary goal in collecting either. And that's okay. And that leads into the third thing, and that's enjoy the experience. That's what life is. That's what any hobby is it's supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to be something that's an absolute misery every time you engage in it. So find the things that make it fun and just double down on those. If you like going through cards and just appreciating the artwork and sorting things out, then do that. If you like making content and taking photos and running a social media account like Instagram and just uploading those things, then do that. There's a number of different ways to enjoy the hobby, and you just need to find what works for you. I think the final thing then as part of that is if you want to maximize the experience, you need to reach out and not just collect in isolation. I did that for a
right.
number of years. I can tell you it's still enjoyable, but there is a whole different level, a whole different dynamic once you establish some relationships with other people that also enjoy it. And you're able to have these types of conversations and these interactions, then learn from one another. And just the level of knowledge will grow exponentially, and the appreciation you have for it will also grow exponentially. So I think if you can do those four things, you're going to find a long-term engagement in the hobby that is not only healthy, but something that will lead to self-improvement.
I love it. Great answer. No, you nailed that one though. That was perfect. That was
Thank you.
perfect. Just like we rehearsed. All right, Matt. You know what the last one is if you've seen one of my podcasts. So we end it with this. What legacy do you hope to leave in the hobby when you're gone?
Well, I hope people look back to my work, my channel, my videos, collecting as one that's just like infectiously passionate about things. And um, the educational piece too, I think is important. That's something that I've sort of branded myself on, is hopefully providing some sort of value with it. Ultimately, though, that's what I'm hoping for. Is selfishly, I want to have fun out of this. I want to have an experience. I want to rekindle and relive those moments from my childhood as a collector, being out with friends and collecting cards and staying up late and battling. We even did that once on a camp out. We like had tents set up and we had multiple tents and we like swapped people's tents as like the battles went on. So it was like the
I
winners
love
are in
it.
this tent, then the losers go over to this tent, and sort of like a bracketed system. But, that's what I hope the legacy is that people take something away from, the content that I produce, that they can apply it to their own learning, their own education, but hopefully also understand, like, some of those psychological elements and just find more, sense of self-fulfillment out of this. Because, like I said, it's all an experience, and the attitude you bring into the experience will determine what you get out of it.
That's right. You always find what you're looking for. That's for sure. And speaking of experience, this one has been awesome, Matt. I've had a great time. I really, again, deeply appreciate you taking the time to spend with us here today. We've ran almost 3 hours, two and a half,
Hey, what a
and
perfect way, though, to cap off my Thanksgiving break and going back to school bright and early tomorrow, but I'll be refreshed because we had this conversation.
I hope so, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. And again, thanks to everybody that joined us here in this podcast now and perhaps in the future. All of the links for Pokemon Classics channel, his eBay, everything's in the description. So if you haven't checked them out already, please feel free to do so. I'm sure you will not be disappointed. And as always, we always appreciate everything you do for us here and make it all worth it. And without you, it wouldn't even be anything. So thanks everybody for your time, and we wish everybody a great one. Look forward to seeing you on the next rants, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.